Flames roared, their glow reflecting in the oily puddles of the workshop floor. Smoke curled menacingly around twisted metal. Tools scattered like fallen soldiers after battle. It wasn't just machinery on fire, it was someone's dream. A promise shattered by greed cloaked in corporate suits and cold-hearted smiles. They came at night, anonymous and ruthless, leaving behind destruction in a clear, chilling message: stop fighting, or we'll crush you. But some fires don't burn out. They ignite something stronger, fiercer, buried deep inside something forged from loss, tempered by injustice. Tonight, beneath the cold starlight, battle lines were drawn, quiet heroes awakened, and a single question burned brighter than the flames themselves. How far would you go to protect what matters? A biting wind swept through the small industrial town of Ferrisburg, Pennsylvania, carrying the promise of an early snowfall as the sun sank low behind the shuttered factories. Inside a dimly lit auto garage on the outskirts of town, Patrick Walsh, a broad-shouldered, 55-year-old mechanic with tired eyes, leaned over the open hood of an ancient ambulance. The overhead lights buzzed with a faint hum, illuminating the wisps of vapor that escaped Patrick's lips each time he exhaled in the chill. He wore a thick flannel shirt beneath an oil-stained coverall, remnants of a life spent tending to engines and transmissions since he was barely a teenager. He felt the ache in his knees and lower back ghosts from all those years stooping and crawling under vehicles. But tonight, the ache felt heavier, mingling with memories of his late wife, gone in a medical mishap 2 winters ago. She died en route to the hospital in a faulty transport vehicle, leaving Patrick perpetually haunted by the idea that a piece of broken machinery could steal a life in mere minutes. He took a wrench to the ambulance's brake line, determined to restore it to working condition. To him, it was more than just a piece of old equipment. He saw every patient who might ride in it, saw the hope or desperation in their eyes, and wanted to make sure somehow that what happened to his wife never happened again. As he worked, a clatter outside broke his concentration. At first, he thought it was just the wind knocking something over, but the sound was too distinct, a metallic crash followed by a muffled cry. Patrick set his wrench aside, wiped his hands on a rag, and hurried to the garage door. Through the fog of his breath, he saw a woman sprawled in the dimly lit street, the wheels of her wheelchair twisted awkwardly. She'd collided with a patch of ice, it seemed, and was now lying on the asphalt while her chair teetered on a bent axle. Without hesitation, he rushed over, boots crunching on the frosty ground. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, voice low but urgent. The woman, dressed in a simple coat, her dark hair tucked into a knit cap, looked up with a mixture of pain and embarrassment in her eyes. I think my chair's broken," she managed, pushing herself onto an elbow as she tried to assess the damage. Patrick crouched beside her. He noticed the side of her wheelchair had a deep crack along the frame, and one wheel was bent so severely it couldn't spin. She was in her early 30s, maybe, with a delicate face that radiated both determination and vulnerability. "Let's get you inside," he said gently. "You'll freeze out here. My name's Patrick, by the way." She introduced herself as Alice Monroe, voice quivering slightly from the cold. Patrick scooped up the broken wheelchair, which squeaked and rattled in protest, then helped Alice to her feet with careful support at her waist. She clung to his arm for balance, her cheeks flushed pink from the temperature. Step by slow step, they made their way into the garage. The overhead lights buzzed, revealing the disarray of the wheelchair's shattered components. Patrick eased her onto an old vinyl chair near his workbench. The place smelled of engine oil, metal shavings, and the faint scent of coffee left too long on a warmer. Alice glanced around, taking in the battered toolboxes and the ambulance with its hood open. "I'm so sorry," she began. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize," Patrick interrupted gently. "Let's see if we can fix this thing." He set the broken wheelchair on his workbench, his gray eyebrows knitting together in concern as he surveyed the damage. From his first impression, it looked bad. Really bad. But there was something in Alice's eyes, a quiet plea that mirrored the same desperation he once felt. And he knew he had to try. The garage interior felt relatively warmer than the biting wind outside, but there was still a draft that seeped through the old corrugated metal walls. Patrick pulled a wool blanket from a back closet and draped it over Alice's shoulders. It smelled faintly of motor oil and dust, but she gratefully drew it close to ward off the chill. "Thank you," Alice said, her voice steadier now, though her fingers still trembled as she gripped the armrests of the old vinyl seat. She peered at Patrick with cautious curiosity. He wasn't what one might call conventionally friendly, more of a quiet, stoic type, but there was a warmth in his dark brown eyes that told her she could trust him. Patrick began examining the mangled wheelchair under the fluorescent overhead light. He twisted the bent axle, ran his fingers over the fractured frame. "I'm no expert on wheelchairs," he said, "but I do know a thing or two about metalwork. Looks like the frame's compromised in multiple spots." He lifted the seat cushion, revealing more structural damage beneath. "Honestly, it might be beyond simple repair." Alice swallowed, pressing her lips together. "I was afraid of that." She hesitated before adding, "I don't really have the money for a new one right now, so I've been, well, making do." Patrick glanced at her. There was a flicker of recognition. He had encountered plenty of people over the years who scraped by, patching up worn-out cars until they practically disintegrated, all because they couldn't afford replacements. The difference here was that Alice needed this device for basic mobility, for living. He let out a slow sigh and shook his head. "Let me think on it. Maybe I can salvage enough from the existing frame or find some spare parts. If not, I might try building something from scratch." Alice's eyes widened. "You'd do that for me." He shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "I've been tinkering my whole life. My father was a mechanic, and I used to watch him repair everything from farming equipment to old wheelchairs for the local clinic. If there's a way, I'll figure it out." They were interrupted by the sound of a younger man's voice calling from the open doorway. Cody, Patrick's 23-year-old apprentice, entered with a swirl of cold air. Cody was lanky, with grease-streaked jeans and a baseball cap pulled low over tousled blonde hair. He hesitated, noticing Alice seated near Patrick's workbench. "Hey, boss," Cody said. "I was just finishing up for the night. You need me to?" His gaze landed on the twisted wheelchair. "Oh, wow, that looks pretty busted." "Yeah, we've got a real project on our hands," Patrick replied, lifting the seat to show Cody the extent of the damage. "Alice here took a spill outside. I'm going to see if I can patch this up or rebuild it." Cody whistled softly, stepping closer. "Well, if anyone can do it, it's you, Patrick. You taught me half the stuff I know about welding." Cody turned to Alice with a friendly smile. "Ma'am, you're in good hands." Alice smiled back, a bit overwhelmed by their immediate willingness to help. "Thank you both," she murmured, crossing her arms beneath the blanket. She glanced around at the rows of wrenches and rusted car parts. The place wasn't fancy, but it had an air of practicality and history, as though it had seen countless stories pass through. She wondered how many broken machines Patrick had resurrected and how many lives might have been changed in the process. "You'd better get home." "Cody," Patrick said, nudging his head toward the door, "I'll lock up after I figure out some next steps for Alice's chair." Cody gave them a small wave. "Sure thing, boss. Nice to meet you." "Alice." He turned on his heel and headed back out into the snowy night, leaving the door to clang shut behind him. Left in the hush of the garage, Patrick and Alice exchanged a look. There was uncertainty in the air, uncertainty about how the wheelchair could be saved, and perhaps a deeper uncertainty about who they each were beneath the surface. But for now, one thing was certain: they were going to try to fix what was broken, no matter how impossible it seemed. The next morning arrived with the sun's pale rays filtering through the dusty windows of the garage. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, coating the cracked asphalt outside in a shimmering layer of white. Patrick had slept poorly on the old couch in his tiny back office, thoughts swirling about how to approach the wheelchair project. He rose stiffly, joints protesting, and shuffled toward his makeshift kitchenette, a corner with a hot plate, a mini fridge, and a stained coffee maker that sputtered to life as he flicked the switch. As he waited for the coffee to brew, He pulled out a battered old folder stuffed with sketches and notes. It contained ideas for custom metalwork, adapted from his father's and grandfather's old logs. Ever since losing his wife, he'd found some solace in rummaging through these designs, imagining ways to make vehicles or devices safer. He'd never quite expected to design a wheelchair, but as he flipped through the pages, a spark of inspiration began to kindle. The plan forming in his mind wasn't simply to repair Alice's busted chair, but rather to build something that would serve her unique needs stronger, more reliable, and more comfortable than any off-the-shelf model. He envisioned lightweight metal tubing, reinforced joints, and a specialized support system that would adapt to her posture. He could already sense the magnitude of the task. He'd need precise measurements of Alice, custom welding jigs, and parts that might be hard to source in a small town. Still, he felt a stirring of purpose he hadn't experienced in a long time, as though he were on the verge of doing something that truly mattered. Amid the hiss of brewing coffee, the garage door rattled open. A brisk wind swept in, carrying the scent of fresh pastries. In stepped Mrs. Pineda, an older neighbor from down the street who had made it her personal mission to check on Patrick after his wife's passing. She was bundled in a thick coat and wore a bright pink scarf, her round face flushed from the cold. "Patrick, I brought you a little breakfast," she announced, setting a paper bag on the workbench. "Morning, Mrs. Pineda," Patrick greeted with a nod, taking a mug from the cabinet and offering it to her. She politely declined, too busy surveying the place. "You're an early bird," he noted. "I heard from Cody that you've got a new project," she said with a meaningful raise of her eyebrows. "A young lady who slipped in the snow." Patrick nodded, sipping his coffee. "Alice Monroe." "Oh," he replied. "Wheelchair's in pretty bad shape. I'm going to try building her a better one." Mrs. Pineda clucked her tongue sympathetically. "Well, if anyone can do it, it's you. You have a knack for breathing life back into broken metal." She paused, then placed a comforting hand on Patrick's arm. "Sometimes that's what we need to do for ourselves, too, you know." He gave a tight-lipped smile, though he appreciated her sentiment. "Thanks, Mrs. Pineda, and thank you for the pastries." He peeked into the paper bag, finding fresh empanadas still warm. "I'll make sure Alice gets one if she stops by." The older woman beamed. "Good, good. Bring her around to my place one day. I'll cook up something special." People like her often need a community, not just a quick fix. With that, Mrs. Pineda hurried out, the door clanging shut behind her and leaving the aroma of her baked goods behind as a gentle comfort. Setting aside the bag of pastries, Patrick refocused on the blueprint sketches in front of him. He heard a sound from the rear of the garage, a shuffle and a soft grunt. He found Alice there, perched on an old wooden stool, rubbing her arms for warmth. She must have come in quietly while he and Mrs. Pineda were talking. "Sorry," she said in a hushed tone. "I didn't want to interrupt." Patrick motioned for her to join him at the workbench. "You should have come right up," he told her. "I've got coffee, or at least something that passes for it." Alice offered a faint smile. "Thank you," she said, maneuvering carefully, mindful of her limited balance without a proper chair. As she settled in, Patrick gently slid a steaming mug of coffee her way, along with one of Mrs. Pineda's empanadas. "Eat up," he urged. "You're going to need your strength, especially if we're going to get started today." "Started," Alice echoed, confusion lacing her voice. Patrick tapped the sketches. "I've been thinking about a custom build for your wheelchair," he said softly. "Something that actually fits you, not just any standard design. I'd need your measurements, your input on comfort, and maybe some patience while I work out the kinks. But if you're willing to trust me, I'd like to give it a try." Alice's eyes widened. She glanced from the sketches to Patrick's serious expression, and a hint of wonder crept into her features. "No one's ever offered to do that for me," she whispered, emotions flickering in her gaze. I'd be grateful." Patrick nodded firmly, feeling a swell of determination in his chest. "Then let's do it," he said. And with that, he opened a new page in his father's folder, ready to begin a project that, though he couldn't yet know would change both their lives forever. They spent the next few days preparing for the build. Patrick, true to his methodical nature, insisted on measuring every angle and every curve of Alice's posture. He jotted down her leg length, torso height, the way her shoulders rounded slightly forward. Alice, for her part, found herself both nervous and intrigued. She'd never had someone scrutinize her seating position so carefully, nor had anyone ever listened so closely to her comfort needs. Between the measurements, Patrick pressed her with questions. How often do you need to shift your weight? Where does your back feel the most strain? Do you spend extended hours in your chair? He scribbled her answers into a beaten-up notebook, diagrams forming in pencil alongside scrawled notes in the margins. You'll have to be patient with me, he told her once, glancing up from his notes. It's not like working on a car's transmission. There, I have reference manuals and standard parts. Here, I'm flying by instinct and a little help from some old sketches. I don't mind, Alice replied, eyes reflecting sincerity. No one's ever bothered to ask me these questions. Usually, I just get a one-size-fits-all design. And that's that. During these sessions, the garage hummed with a new kind of energy. Cody would pop in and out, offering to fetch supplies or share welding tips he'd learned at the local trade school. Mrs. Pineda would arrive with lunch or dinner, fussing over Alice like a grandmother. Although Patrick had never been particularly social, even he couldn't deny there was a certain warmth creeping into the place. People came not just to drop off cars or buy spare parts, but to check on how the wheelchair project was going. On the third day of measurements, an unexpected visitor appeared, a well-dressed man, tall and sharp-featured, who introduced himself as Victor Hartman. He claimed to be a salesperson from a regional mobility supplier. Victor explained that he'd heard about Patrick's unique project and wanted to see if they might collaborate. His offers ranged from discounted aluminum frames to specialized seat cushions. Patrick frowned, not one to take kindly to sales pitches. He found the man's presence oddly pushy, especially in the middle of a quiet afternoon. Alice, too, seemed uneasy. She tried to remain polite, but something in Victor's demeanor set her on edge. His polished shoes and crisp suit stood out like a sore thumb amid the dusty garage. Despite the tension, Patrick listened to the sales talk. He politely declined an immediate partnership, explaining he wanted full creative control over the chair's design. Victor's smile tightened, and he made a point of leaving his business card on the workbench. If you change your mind, he said in a clipped tone. Then he fixed a measured gaze on Alice, almost as though he recognized her. But she kept her face carefully neutral until he turned and left, his footsteps echoing against the concrete. Once Victor was gone, Patrick expelled a breath. You ever see that guy before, he asked Alice? She shook her head, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, worry. Maybe. Strange, Cody muttered, pocketing the business card. I'll see if I can figure out more about him. Alice shot Patrick a small, grateful smile. I appreciate you dealing with him. I'm just a bit uncomfortable around corporate types, I guess. Patrick, noticing her unease, decided not to press further. He changed the subject to seat designs, leading her back to the workbench where a half-drawn schematic awaited. If she truly had secrets, he reasoned, they'd come out in their own time. For now, he had a wheelchair to build, and that task was more than enough to occupy him. Snow fell in thick, lazy flakes by the time Patrick and Alice hit their first major milestone, the day they began cutting and welding the metal frame. The temperature in the garage hovered near freezing, but Patrick fired up an old portable heater and set it by Alice's side to keep her comfortable. Cody was off collecting some custom bearings from a friend's machine shop a few towns over. Patrick donned a heavy welding visor and gloves, then carefully measured the aluminum tubing before slicing it with a well-worn circular saw. Sparks danced like fireflies in the low light. Each cut was precise, guided by the stenciled lines on the tubes. Alice watched from a safe distance, her breath fogging in the cold air, feeling a curious blend of excitement and apprehension. She'd never imagined that her battered, broken wheelchair could be replaced by something so carefully crafted, especially not by a man who'd seemed, at first, like a quiet recluse with no interest in anything beyond engines. When the cutting was done, Patrick moved to the welding table. Clamps and stands arranged to hold the tubing in place. A bead of molten metal appeared with each flick of the welding torch, bridging pieces of aluminum together in shimmering lines. As he worked, he thought of the ambulance repair he'd started that night, how it was still waiting in the corner of the garage. This wheelchair project had consumed most of his time, but he didn't begrudge it. There was a sense of urgency and meaning here he couldn't ignore. At one point, he lifted his visor and called Alice over. "See this joint?" he asked, pointing with a gloved hand. "It has to support most of your weight when you lean forward. If the angle's off by even a few degrees, it could throw off the whole balance." Alice leaned in, shivering slightly despite the heater. "Wow, so everything matters," she murmured. He nodded, carefully adjusting the clamp. "Everything does. That's why I need your feedback once it's partially assembled. We'll test the height, the angle, maybe tweak it if something feels off." Alice smiled at the idea of having a say in the final product. It was empowering in a way she couldn't fully articulate. The usual scenario with a mobility device was that she'd just get what was given, whatever the insurance covered or the manufacturer had in stock. But here, she was part of the process, guiding each measurement with her own experiences. While Patrick continued welding, she found herself studying him. He looked tired, the faint lines around his eyes deeper in the flickering light. Yet there was a calm focus to his movements, a purpose in every spark. She'd seen that kind of focus before, in high-level business meetings where CEOs set their minds on a goal. That thought unsettled her momentarily, because it reminded her of a life she was trying to keep hidden. But Patrick didn't seem to notice. He was lost in his craft. When the initial welds were done, Patrick stepped back and pulled up his visor. He wiped sweat from his brow, which mixed with the dusting of metal flakes on his face. "We'll let this cool, then I'll take a look at the seams. The next step is reinforcing the frame." Alice nodded, her voice soft with gratitude. "I can't thank you enough for all this," she said. "It's more than just a chair. It's my freedom. Really." Patrick's serious expression softened. "Everyone deserves a chance to get around safely," he replied, thinking briefly of his wife. "I just hope we can make something that'll last." They both looked at the skeletal frame of the soon-to-be wheelchair, resting in the welding clamps. It didn't look like much yet, just a series of aluminum tubes, rough weld spots, and the smell of singed metal. But in that humble beginning, there was the spark of something more transformative, not only for Alice, but for Patrick as well. Later that evening, the two sat in the garage's cramped office space, warming themselves with cups of instant soup. The overhead light flickered occasionally, and the portable heater hummed as it worked overtime against the winter chill. Outside, snow piled up against the door, and the temperature had dropped far below freezing. "You've been here pretty late these last few nights," Alice commented, blowing on her soup to cool it. She cast a cautious look around the small room, an old couch shoved against one wall, a desk overwhelmed by spare parts and receipts, and a half-broken lamp that flickered in time with the overhead light. "Don't you have a home to go to?" Patrick stirred his soup with a plastic spoon. "I do, but it's quiet. After my wife passed, I never really got used to being there alone. The couch in here has become my makeshift bed more often than not." Alice's gaze softened. She knew something of loneliness, though she didn't want to talk about her own just yet. "I'm sorry," she said, and for a moment the only sound between them was the clink of spoons against the cheap styrofoam cups. He cleared his throat. "You mentioned that you were a teacher, right?" he asked, steering the conversation away from his loss. "Is that how you ended up in Ferrisburg?" Alice paused, her spoon hovering. The story she'd concocted was simple, that she was a substitute teacher between jobs, looking for a place to settle. She'd told him this on the first day, but she hadn't elaborated on it since. "Yes," she replied quietly, then forced a small smile. "I move around a lot, trying to find the right district to work in." Ferrisburg seemed quiet. Patrick accepted the answer without prying further, but a subtle flicker in her eyes told him there might be more to it. He decided not to push after all. Everyone had their reasons for keeping certain chapters of life closed. He understood that better than most. They finished their soup in a companionable silence, each wrapped in private thoughts. Alice found her attention drawn to a faded photograph pinned to the wall behind Patrick's desk. It showed him years younger, perhaps in a smiling brunette woman, arms around each other in front of the very same garage. There was a glimmer of happiness there that she hadn't seen on Patrick's face in real life. She hesitated, then ventured, "Your wife, what was her name?" Patrick's eyes flicked to the photo, and for a brief second, the pain was palpable. "Marianne," he said softly. She was everything." Alice nodded, not sure if she should say more, but Patrick continued. "We met when I was barely out of high school. She was a nurse's aide, smart as a whip, compassionate, too. She always told me that any machine can be fixed if you give it enough care, and the same goes for people." He swallowed, eyes lingering on the photograph. "She passed away in an accident, something involving a malfunctioning medical transport." A heavy silence settled over them. Alice could see that this was not just a detail in Patrick's past. It was the defining wound that shaped how he moved through the world. "Maybe," she began gently, "maybe building this wheelchair is part of that same compassion she believed in." Patrick managed a sad smile. "I'd like to think so." They lapsed into quiet once more, the moment charged with unspoken empathy. Outside, the wind howled, but in that small office, a different kind of warmth seemed to grow. Each recognized, in the other, a kind of hidden struggle. For now, it was enough to share a meal and a few memories, forging a fragile bond that would soon be tested in ways neither of them could foresee. Over the course of the next week, the skeleton of the wheelchair evolved. Tubes fused seamlessly under Patrick's practiced welding, and the basic shape took form, lightweight yet sturdy, elegant in its function. Alice watched with a mounting sense of awe. Every now and then, Patrick would gently place her into the half-finished contraption to gauge fit, measuring angles and reworking details. He'd order specialized hardware shock absorbers, pivot joints through obscure catalogs or local machine shops. In the meantime, rumors about the custom wheelchair project spread across Ferrisburg. Neighbors stopped by with curiosity, peering at the half-built frame perched on the welding table. Some came offering help. Some came just to see what the fuss was about. And a few local businesses donated materials, steel plates, foam padding, even a high-grade seat fabric typically used in luxury cars. Patrick was grateful, although the influx of attention made him uneasy. He wasn't used to so many eyes on his work, but it fueled the sense that they were doing something important. One particularly cold afternoon, Cody returned from the machine shop carrying a small, carefully packed box of custom bearings. His cheeks were pink from the chill, and he stomped the snow off his boots at the threshold. "Got those bearings, boss," he called out. "And you won't believe this, they gave them to us at Freuded. Practically no markup." Patrick straightened up from his welding bench, lifting the visor. "That's a welcome surprise," he said, blowing out a breath. "We're burning through the budget here, so any discount helps." Cody handed the box to Alice, who examined the tiny, precision-engineered bearings. Her fingers brushed them with quiet reverence. "These are top-notch," she remarked. "They'll make the wheels roll smoothly, even on rough sidewalks." Before Patrick could ask how she knew so much about bearings, the garage door banged open, letting in a blast of freezing air. There stood Victor Hartman again, the same slick salesman from before, wearing a more casual jacket this time, but still exuding a corporate polish that clashed with the garage's gritty interior. "Well, well," Victor said, his smile tight as he glanced around. "Word on the street is you've made considerable progress, Mr. Walsh." Patrick bristled at the man's familiar tone. He set down his welding torch, crossing his arms. "Didn't expect you back." Victor shrugged, stepping carefully between scattered metal scraps. "I have a keen interest in all things mobility. Your endeavor here has piqued my curiosity." His gaze flicked to Alice. "Hello again. Ms. Monroe, you look well." Alice forced a polite nod. Something about the way Victor spoke her name made it sound like a veiled challenge, and Patrick noticed the discomfort in her eyes. "I'm still not interested in any partnership," Patrick said firmly, his voice echoing off the cement walls. Victor chuckled. I'm not here to pitch a partnership. Exactly. I came to warn you. There's a competitor who might be very interested in shutting you down some patent issues. Or so I've heard through the grapevine. Thought you might want to be careful, especially if you're planning to distribute or sell these designs. Patrick exchanged a puzzled glance with Cody. We're not selling anything, he retorted. This is a custom job. Victor feigned sympathy, clucking his tongue. Be that as it may, once you prove a concept like this is viable, bigger fish may try to claim you've infringed on their territory. It'd be a shame if all your work went to waste. Are you threatening us? Cody asked, stepping forward angrily. Victor raised his hands in mock surrender. Not at all, just offering friendly advice. Then he turned to Alice. Ms. Monroe, if you need any official solutions, you know where to find me. With that, he spun on his heel and walked out, leaving an awkward silence in his wake. Alice exhaled sharply, her eyes tinged with an emotion Patrick couldn't quite read. Perhaps anxiety or fear. Cody cursed under his breath, tossing his baseball cap aside. Boss, what the hell was that about? Patrick shook his head. I don't know, but it smells like trouble. He glanced at Alice. Does that guy ring any bells? You sure you've never heard of him before? She hesitated, then shook her head. I really don't know him. Patrick, maybe he's just some pushy salesman who wants to muscle in. But her voice wavered slightly, betraying a hint of uncertainty. Patrick frowned, a million questions swirling in his mind. He grabbed a rag and wiped the sweat from his brow. Let's not get rattled, he said at last, fighting the unease that gnawed at him. We'll keep going. This chair isn't about patents or selling. It's about giving Alice mobility. That's all that matters. Cody nodded in agreement, though an undercurrent of tension now clouded the once bustling energy. In the background, the half-built wheelchair stood like a symbol of hope, and increasingly, a lightning rod for attention they never asked for. They pressed on. Over the next several days, Patrick and Cody installed the freshly acquired bearings, fitted the seat frame, and began experimenting with different cushions. Alias tested each version, offering feedback on comfort and maneuverability. This stage was painstaking multiple iterations of seat angles, back support, and armrest positions. But in those meticulous sessions, a kind of synergy developed between mechanic and user, forging a bond deeper than mere craftsmanship. By now, the garage had become a second home to Alice, who spent hours each day perched atop a stool or propped against makeshift supports, while Patrick fine-tuned the wheelchair's architecture. She felt a strange relief in the routine. Focusing on the mechanical aspects of the chair meant she could momentarily set aside the hidden truths about her own life. One afternoon, when Cody was out on a supply run, Alice helped Patrick position the new carbon fiber footplates. He clamped them in place, then turned to her. All right, try resting your feet on them, he instructed. She did, gingerly. Patrick watched her face for any sign of discomfort. Well, he prompted. A small smile tugged at her lips. It's good, she said. Better than the last iteration. My legs feel more supported, especially around the ankles. Good. He tightened the bolts. I think we're getting close. Just then, Mrs. Pineda bustled in, carrying a steaming pot of stew. Her timing was impeccable. They'd been so immersed in adjustments that neither had stopped for lunch. You two look like you could use some real food, she announced, setting the pot on a cleared section of the workbench. Thank you, Mrs. Pineda, Alice exclaimed, catching the warm, savory aroma. Patrick's stomach growled audibly, and he rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Yeah, much appreciated, he mumbled. They gathered around the makeshift dining setup with chipped bowls and plastic spoons, grateful for the nourishment. During the meal, Mrs. Pineda peeked at the wheelchair, her eyes shining with interest. That's coming along so beautifully, she remarked. Who would have thought our Patrick Walsh would end up building a wheelchair? Alias glanced at Patrick, noting the faint blush that crept across his cheeks. He cleared his throat. Well, it just kind of happened, he said gruffly. Mrs. Pineda nodded knowingly, her gaze traveling between them. Sometimes the best things in life just happen. you know. Then she patted Patrick's shoulder affectionately. Now, remember, you still owe me a new handrail for my porch steps. Patrick chuckled. Once I finish this, I promise I'll swing by. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than usual. Alice found herself telling Mrs. Pineda a carefully edited version of her life story, how she'd been in a car accident that had left her paralyzed from the waist down, how she'd bounced from place to place trying to find a community she could truly belong to. The older woman listened with genuine empathy, occasionally murmuring words of comfort, though Alice left out the parts of her life that mattered most: the corporate battles, the hidden wealth, the real reason she'd come to a small town under a different name. She felt a surge of guilt, like she was betraying the kindness these people had shown her. But she couldn't reveal it herself yet. Not until she was sure of Patrick's integrity, sure he wasn't just after a payday. Finishing her stew, Mrs. Pineda stood up. All right, I'll leave you to your business. She pointed a spoon at Patrick. Don't forget to rest. Patrick, you can't pour from an empty cup. He dipped his head in a polite nod, already planning to work late into the night. Once Mrs. Pineda left, they resumed fiddling with the new footplates. The hush of the garage seemed more intimate now, as though they'd forged a small family here. Alice rested her hands on the chair's metal frame, feeling the cool, smooth surface beneath her fingertips. She reflected on the stark contrast, how she once oversaw massive budgets and entire teams. Yet here she was, in a modest garage, thankful for a single bowl of stew and the unwavering dedication of a man who knew nothing of her corporate empire. A pang of warmth flooded her chest. Maybe, she thought, genuine human connection was worth more than any contract or board meeting. On a crisp Saturday morning, the wheelchair finally reached a stage where Patrick deemed it 95% done, and that, by his standards, was cause for celebration. He and Cody had spent the previous night installing a set of custom wheels with sleek treads designed to handle snowy sidewalks. They'd also added adjustable handles, in case Alice ever needed assistance navigating rough terrain. To mark the milestone, Alice arrived with a thermos of hot cocoa and a bag of freshly baked muffins from the local bakery, her small token of appreciation. As they settled into the garage's main area, setting up an impromptu breakfast, Alice felt a tremor of excitement ripple through her. She was about to try the chair in a near-finished state. Cody, sporting a grin, pushed the newly assembled wheelchair forward. It gleamed under the fluorescent lights, an elegant fusion of brushed aluminum, carbon fiber accents, and contoured cushions. Well, Ms. Monroe, he said with exaggerated formality, your chariot awaits. A small group of neighbors had gathered at the open garage door, too curious to stay away. Mrs. Pineda stood among them, along with a few local youths and even a retired machinist who donated some scrap metal for the project. The air crackled with anticipation as Alice positioned herself on a low stool, preparing to transfer into the new chair. Patrick hovered, arms outstretched to assist if needed. Take your time, he cautioned gently, though his own pulse hammered with nerves. If something was off, if the seat angle caused pain or the back support pinched, he'd feel personally responsible. This was more than a mechanical job. It was a promise he'd made to give Alice real freedom. Slowly, she braced her arms, lifting and shifting until she settled into the seat. The hush in the garage was absolute as her weight sank into the cushions. Her posture found the support arcs, and the footplates aligned with her legs. She gave a cautious push on the rims, the wheels rolling smoothly, silently even, across the concrete floor. It's so light, she whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. She tried a small spin. The chair pivoted almost effortlessly, responding to her slight movements. The crowd at the door broke into spontaneous applause. Mrs. Pineda let out a delighted whoop, and Cody grinned broadly, his face alight with pride. Feels balanced? Patrick asked, anxiety evident in his voice despite his calm exterior. Alice nodded vigorously. It's perfect. Her voice caught. I've never sat in anything like this. The sense of triumph was palpable, like the moment an artist completes a painting or a composer hears their symphony performed live. For Patrick, It felt as though a piece of him had been repaired alongside the metal before the applause could die down. Though a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and Victor Hartman stepped out. His timing, as always, was unnervingly precise. He approached the group with measured strides, wearing a face that straddled the line between curiosity and patronizing smugness. "Well, isn't this a celebration?" he drawled, eyeing the wheelchair. "I see the final product is quite impressive." Patrick stiffened, and Alice's hands tightened on the rims of her chair. It was as though Victor's presence cast a dark shadow over the moment. "We're in the middle of something," Patrick said flatly. Victor ignored the tension. "I'd like to speak with you privately. Mr. Walsh, it concerns the future of your little project." His gaze flicked dismissively at Alice, though he attempted a polite nod in her direction. The crowd fell silent, picking up on the shift in atmosphere. Cody looked ready to bar the man's path, but Patrick raised a hand. "All right," he relented, then turned to Alice. "Go ahead, take it for a spin around the block if you want. Cody, keep an eye on things." Alice hesitated. Victor's interruptions always felt ominous, but she nodded. This moment was too important to let fear overshadow it. She gripped the rims of her new chair and rolled out through the open garage door, greeted by a light dusting of snow in the crisp winter air. A few curious neighbors followed along, cheering and laughing as she navigated the uneven sidewalk with ease. Patrick led Victor inside, away from the prying eyes of the small crowd. He crossed his arms, leveling a glare at the uninvited visitor. "All right, talk." Victor smiled thinly, his gaze darting around as if inspecting the place. "Let's just say I represent certain interests who find your custom approach threatening." He paused. "I'm not here to strong-arm you. I'm here to propose an arrangement that could be very lucrative for you." Patrick's jaw tightened. He already disliked the man's insinuations, but part of him was curious. "And if I refuse," he asked, voice taut. Victor shrugged. "Then you might find yourself mired in patent suits, licensing claims, all sorts of legal quicksand. Surely you don't want that for your new friend, Ms. Monroe, do you?" Patrick clenched his fists. The man had done his homework, obviously, and knew just where to twist the knife. But one thing was certain: Patrick Walsh had never been one to buckle under threats. Outside, Alice maneuvered her new wheelchair down the icy sidewalk with surprising agility. Each subtle push on the rims propelled her forward, and the adjustable seat kept her posture nearly perfect. A group of supportive neighbors trailed her, cheering whenever she deftly avoided a patch of ice. For a brief moment, she forgot about corporate politics, about the secrets she was harboring. She felt normal, free, capable. Cody jogged alongside, a wide grin on his face. "Look at you go," he exclaimed. "I've seen fancy wheelchairs before, but nothing quite like this." Alice slowed to a stop near an old, boarded-up store, turning to face Cody. Her cheeks were flushed with excitement. "Patrick's a genius," she said, voice trembling slightly from the cold. "And you've helped so much with the parts and the design." "Thank you, Cody." He shrugged, trying to mask how touched he was. "Oh, it's nothing. Just doing my job." He kicked a bit of slush off the curb. "So, you planning to stick around Ferrisburg now that you've got your new wheels?" A flicker of worry passed across her face. She glanced back at the garage where Patrick was still talking to Victor. Though she couldn't see them clearly through the haze of falling snow, the tension in Victor's posture was evident even from a distance. "I'm not sure," she admitted quietly. I I like it here, but I have obligations." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "It's complicated." Cody gave her a sidelong look. "Well, I've learned not to pry," he said, "but I hope you do stick around, at least for a while. You kind of gave us a sense of purpose. You know Patrick especially. I haven't seen him this engaged since—" He paused, then decided not to finish the sentence about Marianne. Alice reached for one of the wheelchair's handles, feeling the smooth metal beneath her palm. She understood that her presence here had stirred something in Patrick. Maybe a reminder that life could still be meaningful, even after tragedy. And in turn, he'd rekindled something in her, the belief that not everyone was out for personal gain. Just then, Mrs. Pineda appeared, trotting up with a thick scarf fluttering around her neck. My goodness, dear, you look marvelous in that chair. It's like watching a little girl ride her bicycle for the first time. Alice laughed, a sound that came more freely now. It does feel a bit like that, she admitted, spinning the wheelchair in a small circle. Snowflakes swirled around them, the scene almost picturesque. Mrs. Pineda clapped her hands. Now, don't go too far. The roads might be slippery. Maybe head back to the garage before we freeze out here. Alice nodded and began to wheel back, but her mind lingered on Victor Hartman's appearance. His persistent interference was more than a simple sales pitch. She knew the type people in the corporate world who scouted out potential threats or resources for their own agenda. Still, she had hoped to avoid drawing attention to herself, to the place where she was conducting her quiet test of human decency. And yet, here he was, potentially spoiling everything. By the time they reached the garage, Alice noticed Patrick's rigid stance and Victor's smug expression as they concluded their conversation. She caught Patrick's eyes for a moment, and he offered a small nod that spoke volumes. He wasn't budging. Victor walked out, hands tucked in his pockets. He gave Alice a thin smile as he passed her. Enjoy that chair, he said. Just remember, everything has a candidate. Cody stepped protectively beside Alice, his jaw tight, but Victor simply strode to his car and drove off, leaving a palpable tension in his wake. Alice looked to Patrick. You okay? She asked softly. He exhaled, rolling his shoulders as though to shake off the confrontation. I'll live, he replied, then eyed her wheelchair. I see you're taking to that thing like a duck to water. A genuine smile curved Alice's lips. It's everything I hoped it would be. She paused, noticing the tightness around Patrick's eyes. But now I'm worried about you, about us. What did he want this time? Patrick shook his head, running a hand through his graying hair. Oh, he tried to talk about big money deals and threatened potential legal troubles if we don't cooperate with some bigger fish in the mobility sector. I told him to get lost. Cody let out a low whistle. You think that's the end of it? Patrick's gaze drifted to the half-packed boxes of spare parts, the brand-new wheelchairs shining in the cold garage lights, the neighbors who had come out to celebrate. Then he fixed his eyes on Alice. No, he said quietly. I doubt it is. 2 days later, the garage felt eerily still. The usual stream of neighbors and curious passers-by had trickled off, likely deterred by the biting cold snap that drove everyone indoors. Patrick busied himself with a new project replacing brake pads on a battered pickup truck, while Alice tinkered with the final adjustments on her wheelchair's armrests. She'd grown confident enough to operate most of Patrick's smaller tools, and he allowed her the freedom, occasionally glancing over from the truck to make sure she was safe. Try adjusting that bolt another quarter turn, he called out, hearing the telltale squeak of metal. Should reduce wobble in the pivot joint. Got it, Alice responded, biting her lip in concentration as she turned the wrench. Each click felt empowering, a reminder that she was no mere bystander in her own life. Over by the workbench, Cody scrolled through something on his phone, tension evident in the way his shoulders hunched. After a moment, he slid the phone back into his pocket and made his way to Patrick. Boss, Cody said quietly, I've been doing some digging around about that Victor Hartman. He lifted his cap and scratched his head. He's connected to Brunswick Mobility, one of the biggest manufacturers of medical equipment on the East Coast. Patrick lifted his head from under the truck's chassis. Brunswick Mobility, he echoed. Never dealt with them. But I've heard the name. They're massive. Cody nodded. Yeah, they swallow up smaller companies. They also have a track record of aggressive legal tactics. If they think you're stepping on their patent toes, they're not afraid to sue. Or worse. Patrick's mouth formed a grim line. Great. Alice paused her wrenching, overhearing. You think they're going to come after you? Cody shrugged uneasily. I don't know, But it's weird that Hartman showed up in person, especially in a small town like Ferrisburg. Patrick set down his tools and wiped his hands on a rag. "Well, let them come," he said, the faintest flicker of defiance in his eyes. "I'm not selling anything. I'm just building a custom chair for a friend." Alice felt a surge of conflicting emotions. She was grateful for Patrick's protective spirit, but she also knew how ruthless the corporate world could be, especially if it turned out that she was the real target. She considered telling them the truth, but the fear of shifting how they saw her kept her silent. That evening, after Cody had left for the day and the garage was quiet except for the hum of the space heater, Alice gathered her courage. She found Patrick organizing a tray of wrenches, each placed meticulously according to size. "Patrick," she began, heart pounding, "there's something I should probably tell you." He turned, sensing the gravity in her voice. "Go on," he said gently. She tried to swallow her nerves. "I haven't been entirely honest about my background. I'm not just a traveling teacher. I'm connected to the medical technology field high up. Actually," she hesitated, meeting his eyes, "I came here looking for a mechanic who wouldn't just see dollar signs if he found out who I was." Patrick's brow furrowed slightly, meaning Alice took a breath, her pulse roaring in her ears. "I'm a majority shareholder in a mobility tech company. Let's just say it's big enough to make me wealthy. I came to Ferrisburg under a pseudonym because I wanted to see if there was anyone left who genuinely cared about people rather than profit." Patrick stared at her, absorbing the confession. "So Hartman might be here because Brunswick is a rival." Alice finished. "They probably caught wind that someone was developing a new custom wheelchair design. They might have run a background check, recognized me, and now they're trying to push you into some shady deal or scare you off." A thick silence hung in the air. Patrick set down the wrench tray. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She looked away, guilt making her stomach churn. "I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that if you knew who I was or what I have, that you'd treat me differently, or that you'd only see this as a way to get rich." Patrick's eyes flashed with hurt, but also a strange empathy. "I'm not gonna lie, this is a shock," he said slowly, "but I don't see how it changes what we've built here. The chair is for you, and I built it because you needed it. I don't want to die more than what we agreed on, actually. We never even discussed payment." Alice's relief was sudden and profound, tears pricking at her eyes. "Thank you," she managed, though the weight of deception still lingered. "I just needed to be sure." He nodded, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well, now we know what we're up against." He paused, his voice quieter. "I guess the question is, what do we do next?" They decided to proceed as if nothing had changed. Though the atmosphere between them crackled with new tension, Patrick now understood that the threat from Brunswick Mobility could be far more serious than he had first thought, especially since it wasn't just his custom build at stake. It might be a power move against Alice. Cody sensed the shift too, even though he wasn't privy to all the details yet. A few days later, the first real wave of trouble hit. Patrick returned from a quick trip to a hardware supplier to find the garage door ajar, fresh tire tracks in the snow, and a strange chemical odor drifting on the air. Cautiously stepping inside, he discovered utter chaos. One corner of the shop was splashed with some sort of solvent, corroding metal and eating away at paint. Spare parts were scattered, and Alice's wheelchair had been toppled from its stand, the seat cushions slashed. His heart hammered as he surveyed the destruction. He rushed to the wheelchair, carefully lifting it back upright, checking the frame. Deep gashes marred the metal. Acid burns etched along one side. "Damn it," he cursed under his breath, fury surging in his veins. Cody arrived moments later, skidding on the slick concrete. "Boss, what the?" His eyes went wide at the sight. "Oh boy, oh no. Oh man, is it ruined?" Patrick ran a shaking hand over the damaged frame. "I don't know yet," he whispered, voice tight with rage and dread. His tools, too, had been tossed haphazardly, and some of his father's heirloom wrenches were soaking in the corrosive puddle. God, these belong to my dad. Alice appeared next, rolling in on an older backup chair that Patrick had lent her. She gasped at the destruction. Patrick, are you all right? What happened? He lifted the burned piece of metal from her custom build. Sabotage. Someone wanted to send a message. Cody paced frantically, pulling out his phone to call the police. This has to be Brunswick, he muttered. Or their goons. Who else would do something like this? Alice felt a surge of guilt and fear all at once. I'm so sorry, she managed, glancing around with tearful eyes. If it weren't for me, don't say that. Patrick cut in, though his voice was laced with controlled anger. They're the ones who did this. When the police arrived, they took photographs, asked cursory questions, and filed a report. They didn't offer much hope, especially since no cameras were installed to capture the vandals. We'll look into it, but these cases can be tough. An officer told them, might want to consider beefing up your security. As soon as they left, Alice turned to Patrick. I'll pay for the repairs, she said quickly. I'll replace every tool. I'll get top-of-the-line security systems, whatever you need. He shook his head, gently but firmly. We'll figure it out, he murmured, focusing more on triaging the damage to the frame. It's not about money. It's about principle. Still, the bitterness in his eyes revealed a deeper wound. This garage was all he had left of a life that once included Mary Ann, his father's legacy, and a sense of quiet dignity. Now that sanctuary had been violated, reminding him of how easily the things you treasure can be destroyed. Alice kneeled beside him, running her hand over a gouge in the wheelchair's armrest. Can we fix it? She asked softly. He exhaled slowly. We can try, he said. I'll do everything I can. But that solvent might have weakened the metal. We might have to rebuild entire sections. Cody stomped around the perimeter, eyes burning with anger. We can't let them get away with it. We need to show them we're not backing down. I agree, Alice said, drawing resolve from the rubble. No matter what it takes, we rebuild stronger. Patrick looked at her, seeing the fiery determination in her eyes that mirrored his own anger. For a moment, the gravity of their alliance felt almost tangible. All right, then, he said, voice low but steady. Let's show them who they're dealing with. The following days blurred into a frenzy of salvage and repair. Patrick and Cody worked round the clock to assess which parts of the wheelchair could be saved and which needed remanufacturing. Some sections of the frame were salvageable after thorough cleaning and neutralizing the corrosive residue, but the seat and specialized cushions were a total loss. Patrick's father's wrenches were pitted and rusted. A few were beyond saving. That loss stung the most. Alice refused to stand by idly. Despite Patrick's protests, she insisted on helping, sometimes staying at the garage well past midnight. She scrubbed away chemical stains, sorted salvageable materials, and used her clout finally out in the open to order high-quality replacements at breakneck speed. We can have them shipped overnight, she told Patrick, tapping her phone. Don't worry about the mom, I have connections. He gave her a long look, one that mixed gratitude and lingering disbelief. Even though he knew about her background, it was still jarring to see how quickly she could mobilize resources. Yet he didn't fight it. He couldn't afford pride when everything he'd worked for had nearly gone up in smoke. One late evening, Mrs. Pineda arrived, arms laden with blankets and thermoses of hot soup. She took in the scene: Patrick hunched over a welding rig, Cody rummaging through parts, Alice reviewing shipping invoices, and immediately set about distributing warmth in the form of food and kind words. I heard about what happened, she said softly, pressing a thermos into Patrick's hands. I'm so sorry. You'll get through this, honey. He swallowed hard, nodding. Thanks, Miss Pineda. I appreciate it. She reached a gentle hand out to touch his shoulder. This place, your garage, means something to us. Patrick, we won't let outsiders tear it down. In that moment, Patrick realized how far beyond just a mechanical workshop his garage had become. It was a community hub, a place where neighbors felt invested in each other's well-being. The sabotage had shaken that foundation, but it also galvanized everyone's determination. Midnight approached. The only sounds the whir of heaters, the clank of tools, and the rustle of shipping materials. Cody crashed on the old office couch, too exhausted to drive home. Alice sat with her laptop propped on a wooden crate, finalizing orders for precision components. Patrick, despite the bone-deep fatigue, couldn't stop himself from reassembling a portion of the wheelchair frame. Each weld sparked under the fluorescent lights, small bursts of brilliance that felt almost defiant in the face of adversity. Finally, Alice shut her laptop, rubbing her eyes. "Everything's ordered," she announced, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "Reinforced aluminum tubing, new seat foam, improved shock absorbers. We'll get it all by tomorrow evening." Patrick powered down the welding torch, pulling off his gloves to flex aching fingers. "That's good," he said. "Real good." She rolled herself closer, noting the slump of his shoulders. "You need rest," she said gently. "This can wait a few hours. You won't be any good to anyone if you collapse." He gave a weary chuckle. "Maybe you're right. I'm getting too old for all-nighters." A silence stretched between them, carrying an undercurrent of mutual respect and a hint of something more. "Patrick," Alice began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I thank you for not giving up. On this or on me." He met her gaze, the lines of stress around his eyes softening. "I don't know how to give up," he admitted, almost sheepishly. "Never learned that skill." She smiled, and it was like a sliver of warmth in the cold. For a moment, the battered garage, the ruined tools, and the heavy threat looming outside all faded into the background. There was only the hush of the night, the shared fire in their hearts, and the sense that something profound was forming between them, piece by piece, like the wheelchair itself. The next evening brought a flurry of deliveries, crates of specialized parts stacked high in the garage, each bearing labels from advanced metallurgy labs or high-end medical manufacturers. It felt surreal for Patrick, seeing top-tier components arrive in a humble workshop that usually handled rusted pickups and old sedans. Yet he couldn't deny the rush of possibility coursing through him. Together, they tore into the shipments, verifying each item before organizing them on a makeshift assembly line. Cody marveled at the carbon fiber rods, lifting one in disbelief. "This is the same stuff they use in aerospace, right?" he asked, turning to Alice. She nodded, a little smile forming. "Yep, some of our sister companies apply parts to the aviation industry. Thought it might help lighten the frame without sacrificing strength." Patrick carefully inspected a shock absorber that looked more suited for a high-performance bicycle than a standard wheelchair. The brand name was unfamiliar, but the craftsmanship was impeccable. He ran his thumb over the polished metal, nodding his approval. "This'll definitely handle rougher terrain." By midnight, they had the new frame partially assembled. Patrick's welding torch danced across the metal, forging new seams where the sabotage had left them vulnerable. Cody assisted with extra hands and steady eyes, occasionally rotating the pieces for optimal angles. Alice used her laptop to reference advanced design specs, but mostly she offered her own body as the template, ensuring the fit remained custom-tailored. At around 2 a.m., they took a break. Mrs. Pineda had left hours ago, and the rest of the town was fast asleep. The three of them sat in the glow of a single standing lamp, sipping stale coffee and munching on cold sandwiches. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the garage doors. "After we finish," Cody mused, blinking bleary eyes, "what then? Do we, install security cameras or something?" Alice frowned and, "Yes, definitely. I'll cover the cost for a decent system. We can't risk another attack. At least then we'll have evidence if they try something again." Patrick nodded, though he seemed distant, his gaze drifting toward the battered remains of his father's wrenches, now laid out on a side table. He swallowed, then forced himself back into the conversation. "We'll do that first thing tomorrow," he said. "I don't want to go through this again." A heaviness settled as they recalled the sabotage, but then Cody cleared his throat, forcing a lighter tone. "So, boss, you think once this is done, you'll maybe branch out into making more wheelchairs?" Patrick stiffened, not having considered that question directly. Before he could answer, Alice spoke up. He could, if he wanted to. She said, "There's a real need for custom designs. Not everyone fits the generic medical supply mold." He glanced at her. "I'm just a small-town mechanic." "Alice, building one chair was enough of a challenge." She offered a half smile. "True, but you've proven a principle if you take the time to understand the user. You can build something that surpasses any mass-produced item. That kind of craftsmanship, well, there's a market for it." Patrick exhaled, tension visible in his posture. "Maybe so, but I'm not sure I want all that attention. I fix things because it's what I do, not because I want to become some big shot." A flicker of amusement danced in Alice's eyes, but she didn't push. She understood his reluctance. Fame and corporate involvement had burned her enough times to last a lifetime. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," she said gently. They finished their coffee, returning to the half-built wheelchair. As the torch sparked back to life, bright arcs of molten metal illuminated the garage, carving shadows that danced against the walls. In that glow, it was easy to imagine that they weren't just rebuilding a piece of equipment, but forging a new path forward, one that defied cynicism and corporate greed, one that insisted on the importance of community and compassion. Outside, unseen in the dark, a figure watched through the partially frosted windows. A silhouette, nearly indistinguishable, lingered for a moment before disappearing into the snow. Whether it was curiosity or malevolence that compelled them, none inside the garage noticed. They were too busy fighting for something they believed in, unaware of the final storm that was about to break. When the sun finally rose, hazy and pale against the winter sky, Patrick snapped off the welding torch and let out a ragged sea. He could barely feel his fingers or toes, but the adrenaline had kept him going through the night. The new wheelchair frame shone in the early light, the carbon fiber rods and polished aluminum melding seamlessly into a structure that looked both modern and fiercely resilient. Alice, weary but determined, tested the seating alignment. She lowered herself carefully, feeling the gentle resistance of shock absorbers as the chair settled beneath her weight. With a few pushes on the rims, she rolled forward, eyes brightening despite her fatigue. "It's incredible," she breathed. "Better even than the first version." Cody, who had been dozing against a stack of boxes, jolted awake at the sound of her voice. He stumbled to his feet, rubbed his eyes, and watched with a satisfied grin. "You look like you're gliding," he said. "All that fancy new metal sure paid off." Patrick knelt beside the chair, checking the welds for any cracks or imperfections. He ran his calloused hand along the frame, exhaling relief when everything seemed solid. "We'll have to do more thorough testing after we get some shut-eye," he said, standing up with a groan. "But yeah, I think this one's ready." Tears welled up in Alice's eyes, not from sadness, but from an emotional release. She reached out and squeezed Patrick's arm. "You saved it," she whispered, her gratitude tinged with awe. "After all they did to destroy it, you still saved it." He nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "We saved it," he corrected, glancing at Cody, who beamed proudly. "Couldn't have done it alone." They might have savored that moment of triumph longer, but the sound of a car engine broke the quiet. Patrick's body tensed, fearing another unwanted visit from Victor Hartman. But instead, a local police cruiser pulled up, and Officer Jenkins stepped out, trudging through the snow. "Morning," he said, tipping his hat. "I came by to see if there were any updates on the vandalism case." Patrick wiped his brow. "Not much to tell. We've been rebuilding all night." He gestured to the gleaming wheelchair. Officer Jenkins took in the scene, whistling softly. "Fancy. Well, I might have something that could help." A neighbor down the block installed a security camera on their garage. They caught a glimpse of a vehicle pulling away from this area around the time of the break-in. "We're checking the plates now." Alice felt her heart leap. "That's good news." "Right, could be," Jenkins agreed. "We'll let you know if anything comes of it." He frowned slightly, his gaze sweeping across the hastily reassembled tools and scorched floor. "In the meantime, stay vigilant. Whoever did this might not be done." As Jenkins left, Patrick turned to Alice and Cody, both of whom wore matching expressions of guarded hope. "Let's rest for a bit," he said, removing his heavy work gloves. "Then we'll do a final check on the chair. After that," he trailed off, uncertain of how the next phase would play out. Alice rolled closer in the newly rebuilt wheelchair. "We keep going," she said softly, finishing his thought. "We don't let them scare us. We prove that this design and the heart behind it can't be destroyed." Her words stirred something deep in Patrick. He saw his father's legacy in the tools, his wife's memory in every act of kindness, and the possibility of a better future in the custom wheelchair. The saboteurs had taken so much, but they hadn't broken their resolve. If anything, they'd hardened it, like metal tempered in fire. Exhaustion finally took hold. Cody sank onto the couch, snoring softly within minutes. Alice let her head rest against the wheelchair's cushioned back. Patrick stepped outside briefly to inhale the crisp morning air. The quiet neighborhood still showed the scars of winter, the sun's feeble rays barely melting the snow-packed roads. But inside his chest, he felt a defiant warmth. Whatever battles lay ahead with Brunswick Mobility, with unscrupulous suits like Hartman, or even with his own doubts, he knew he wouldn't face them alone. Officer Jenkins' lead on the suspicious vehicle soon bore fruit. Early the next day, he showed up with new information, a grainy still image of a black SUV leaving Patrick's garage around the time of the sabotage. Although the license plate was partially obscured by snow, the first few digits matched a rental vehicle signed out in the name of Alan Pierce. The name meant nothing to Patrick or Cody, but a cold twinge in Alice's gut suggested that it might be an alias linked to Brunswick Mobility. She kept that suspicion to herself for the moment. "Let me know if you remember any detail that could help," Jenkins said, folding up the photograph. "We're still short on proof, but if we can tie this Pierce to Brunswick or that Hartman fellow, we might have a motive." Patrick rubbed the tense muscles at the back of his neck. "This is turning into more than just a vandalism case," he noted grimly. Alice, perched in her rebuilt wheelchair, nodded in agreement. She felt responsible for bringing this trouble to Patrick's doorstep, though she also reminded herself that Brunswick was the one crossing lines. In an attempt to ward off further incidents, they installed a small network of security cameras around the garage. Cody wired them to a digital recorder in Patrick's office, while Alice financed the equipment. The moment the last camera went online, a collective sigh of relief rippled through them, though the anxious undercurrent remained. The next major challenge arrived in the form of a bulky envelope delivered by courier. Inside, Patrick found a cease and desist letter from a high-powered law firm representing Brunswick Mobility. The letter alleged that the wheelchair design in question infringed on multiple patents held by Brunswick. In bold letters, it demanded that Patrick halt all production, destroy any existing prototypes, and hand over all design documentation within 10 days or face legal consequences. Cody stood behind him, peering over Patrick's shoulder at the official-looking text. "They're off their rockers," he blurted. "Incensed. Your design is custom. You didn't copy anything from them." Alice frowned, tapping a manicured nail on the letter's intimidating letterhead. "Their patents cover broad concepts, like adjustable wheel axles and certain shock absorption techniques. They could claim your build is substantially similar if they want to push it." Patrick shook his head, fury simmering below his calm exterior. "I've never seen any of their schematics. Everything we did from scratch or from my dad's old notes. This is pure intimidation." Alice carefully set the letter aside. "It won't be easy," she warned. "They have teams of lawyers. They can bury you in motions and subpoenas. But," she continued, meeting his eyes, "we can fight back if you want. I have legal resources, people I trust. If we show that your design is unique, that you built it specifically for my measurements, we might stand a chance." Patrick remained silent for a moment, gazing around his garage. He remembered the first time he'd welded the chair's frame, the night spent hunched over each piece, the sabotage that nearly ended it all. This wasn't just about a patent infringement claim. It was about proving that a small-town mechanic could stand up to a corporate giant and that doing the right thing still counted for something. "We fight," he said at last, his voice steady. "They want a war. They've got one. I'm not destroying the chair I built for you, Alice. It's your mobility, your life. They have no right." Cody exhaled a relieved breath. "Then we're all in this together," he affirmed, looking at Alice. She nodded, steeling herself for the storm ahead. If Brunswick was determined to crush Patrick, they'd soon discover they weren't just up against a lone mechanic. They were facing a united front, one fueled by grit, community, and a quiet but unbreakable sense of justice. To prepare for the inevitable legal clash, Alice made good on her offer of professional help. She placed a discreet call to a respected intellectual property lawyer named Claire Fitzgerald, someone she'd worked with in her previous corporate life. Claire was known for her fierce advocacy and attention to detail, precisely what they needed to navigate Brunswick's murky patent claims. Within 2 days, Claire Fitzgerald arrived in Ferrisburg, stepping out of a rental sedan in a tidy black pantsuit and carrying a sleek briefcase. She had the air of someone who'd won more fights than she'd lost cool, composed, and distinctly unimpressed by small-town charm. Patrick wasn't sure what to make of her at first. He stood by the garage door, arms folded, as Alice introduced them. "Claire, this is Patrick Walsh," Alice said. "He's the mechanic who built the wheelchair. And this is Cody Jenkins, his apprentice." Claire shook their hands in a no-nonsense manner. "Nice to meet you both. I've reviewed Brunswick's cease and desist letter. It's the usual nonsense, vague references to broad patents, threats of litigation. I'll need to see any design documents, sketches, or prototypes you have." Patrick scowled slightly. "You want me to hand over all my notes?" "It stays confidential," Claire assured him. "I'm on your side, but I need to understand exactly how your design works, so I can argue its uniqueness." Alice placed a reassuring hand on Patrick's shoulder. "Trust her," she whispered. "She's good." With a reluctant nod, he led Claire into his cramped office. Together, they spread out his father's old blueprints, his own scribbled sketches, and the pages of measurements he'd taken from Alice. Claire sifted through them with quick efficiency, occasionally furrowing her brow as she compared each diagram to Brunswick's claims. "From a cursory look," Claire concluded, tapping her pen on a schematic, "your design doesn't appear to violate any specific Brunswick patent. They have patents on mass-produced wheelchair frames with standardized bolt positions. But this custom approach, it's borderline uncharted territory. They can't claim the concept of a wheelchair in general, unless they find a detail that too closely mirrors their existing products." "Will that matter in court?" Cody asked, flanking Claire's other side. "Sometimes big corporations just drag you through lawsuits anyway." "It might," Claire admitted, "which is why we need to be proactive. We'll file a declaratory judgment action basically asking the court to rule that Patrick's design does not infringe in any Brunswick patents. It forces them to put up or shut up." Patrick rubbed his temples. The idea of a court battle made him feel queasy, but the alternative, destroying the wheelchair he'd poured his heart into, was unthinkable. Claire closed her briefcase with a snap. "I can start drafting documents right away, but I'll need a place to set up, somewhere private." Alice offered her own hush-hush solution. "You can work from my laptop. I'll get us a secure connection at a small motel nearby." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Still operating under the radar, Ms. Monroe." A faint blush crept into Alice's cheeks. "Let's just say I'm not ready for certain people to know exactly where I am." Patrick and Cody exchanged a look but said nothing. If this was the price of having a fierce ally like Claire, they'd take it. Legal complexities aside, they had a community behind them, a new wheelchair that proved the power of genuine care, and a cause that felt bigger than any of their individual worries. As Claire headed out to settle in, Patrick gazed at the battered garage walls around him. This place had become a battleground, but also a symbol of possibility. In the silent, dust-filled air, he reminded himself, no matter how daunting the fight, he wouldn't let Brunswick or anyone else take away what they'd built. While Claire delved into legal preparations, Ferrisburg hummed with rumors about the ongoing situation. Word spread that Patrick's garage had been sabotaged, that a giant corporation was trying to shut down a local mechanic's project to help a disabled woman. Neighbors began stopping by with home-cooked meals, offers of financial donations, and an unspoken message of solidarity. "We've got your back." One crisp morning, Pastor Joe, the energetic leader of the local church, came by with a few volunteers. They carried paint buckets and brushes, explaining that they wanted to help patch the chemical-stained walls, a fresh coat of paint to show we're not backing down. Pastor Joe declared, rolling up his sleeves. Patrick almost refused out of pride, but the earnestness in their faces stopped him. He allowed them to get to work, feeling an unfamiliar warmth bloom in his chest. Meanwhile, Alice took daily test drives in the rebuilt wheelchair, gliding along snowy sidewalks and through the hardware store's aisles. She'd never felt so secure in a mobility device before, and each journey solidified her conviction that Patrick's designs could revolutionize the industry if only they were given a chance. Around midday, Cody burst into the garage, nearly slipping on a patch of ice. "Boss, you won't believe this," he panted, clutching his phone. "The local news team wants an interview. They caught wind of your fight with Brunswick and want to run a segment on it." Patrick's jaw tensed. "An interview? I'm no public speaker." Cody shrugged. "It might help your case. Public opinion matters, especially if this goes to court. And it could expose Brunswick's bullying tactics." "They might back off," Alice chimed in softly. "He's right. Corporations hate negative press. If people see the truth, how you're just trying to help someone live better, they might rally behind us." Patrick mulled it over, his eyes flicking to the newly painted corner of the garage where volunteers were laughing and joking as they worked. He hated the spotlight, but times had changed. "All right," he said at last, "I'll do it. But just this once." When the news crew arrived, a polite reporter named Bethany Mills and a cameraman they set up near the entrance of the garage, the big overhead door letting in natural light. Bethany was warm and disarming, instantly putting Patrick at ease. She asked about the vandalism, the letter from Brunswick, and what had motivated him to build the custom wheelchair in the first place. Patrick cleared his throat before answering, the microphone feeling alien in his hands. "I built it because Alice needed it. That's all. Nobody else was offering a solution that fit her individual needs. People deserve dignity and freedom in their mobility, not just a one-size-fits-all device." Bethany nodded, offering an encouraging smile. "And how do you feel about a corporation threatening legal action?" He exhaled. "I think it's wrong. They don't own the concept of caring about someone's comfort or specific needs. They can't bully me or her into giving up." Alice, who was nearby, chimed in, "Patrick's design changed my life. I can go places I never could before. This is about more than patents or business, it's about doing what's right." The interview concluded with Bethany filming Alice expertly maneuvering the wheelchair around a makeshift obstacle course of cinder blocks and leftover lumber. As the camera rolled, the watchers' neighbors, volunteers, even Pastor Joe erupted in applause. Later, after the news team packed up and drove off, Patrick felt a mix of relief and unease. He wasn't used to public scrutiny, but if shining a light on Brunswick's tactics could protect their work, it was worth it. Deep down, though, he sensed this was only the beginning. The real battle had yet to be fought, and they'd need every ounce of support they could muster. A week passed. Ferrisburg found itself in the curious position of national attention, albeit briefly. When Bethany Mills' report on Patrick's struggle aired on regional TV and trickled onto social media, the segment showed clips of the garage, the sabotage damage, and particularly the footage of Alice gracefully steering the wheelchair through snowy streets. The story struck a chord, a humble mechanic standing up to corporate might, fueled by genuine compassion and a small-town sense of unity. The reaction was swift. Patrick began receiving letters of support from strangers who'd seen the broadcast, some of whom shared harrowing stories of battling insurance companies or dealing with poorly fitted wheelchairs. A few even offered money to fund legal defense. Alice, meanwhile, fielded messages from various nonprofits that advocated for disability rights, hoping to align with this new, buzzworthy movement. Among the flood of encouraging voices, there were also ominous notes. Victor Hartman reappeared in Ferrisburg with a team of Brunswick representatives, all clad in expensive suits. They toured the town's modest Main Street, projecting a forced politeness that set everyone on edge. At one point, they approached Pastor Joe at the local diner, pressing him for details about how open-minded Patrick might be to a private settlement. Pastor Joe stiffened, refusing to disclose anything personal, and ended the conversation abruptly. Word of this visit reached Patrick within hours. He stood in the garage, arms crossed, while Cody and Alice looked on. "So they're trying to buy me off now," he muttered, switching from threats to bribery. "Perhaps." Alice placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We knew they'd escalate," she said quietly. "Corporations like Brunswick don't like to lose. They'll explore every angle." Cody spat on the concrete floor, anger blazing in his eyes. "Well, they can explore all they want. We're not backing down." That same afternoon, Claire Fitzgerald arrived with an update. She'd filed the preliminary motion for declaratory judgment and had begun combing through Brunswick's patent portfolio. "They own a mind-boggling array of patents," she informed them, handing Patrick and Alice thick printouts. Some revolve around things as mundane as the shape of certain wheel spokes. Others are broader, but I think we've got enough to argue that your design is custom and does not overlap with their core claims. She paused, tilting her head. "The real problem is their money. They can afford to keep you in court indefinitely if they choose." Patrick swallowed, glancing at the refurbished wheelchair. It gleamed under the overhead lights, a testament to countless hours of meticulous work. "I can't let them drag this on for years," he said. "I have a business to run repairs for half the town. I don't have the time or the finances for an endless court battle." Claire offered a small, sympathetic smile. "That's why public pressure is so vital. If they look like bullies in the media, it undermines their position. It might make them think twice about dragging you through legal hell." Cody snapped his fingers. "Maybe we need a bigger media push. Something that pulls in more disability advocates. More coverage. Let everyone see Brunswick for what they are." Alice nodded. "I know some folks in national outlets. If we show them what's happening here, they might pick it up. Still, we'll be painting targets on our backs." Patrick's gaze traveled over the garage walls, now partially repainted, bearing small signs of a community's love and labor. He remembered the quiet solitude he once cherished before all this began. Yet, looking at Alice in her near-flawless wheelchair, he couldn't find it in himself to regret taking the stand. "All right," he said softly. "Let's do it. We'll bring the fight to them, one step at a time." In an effort to swing momentum in their favor, Alice and Claire organized a small press conference in front of the garage. They invited local journalists, social media influencers who focused on disability rights, and a few regional news outlets that had shown interest after the original report aired. Patrick agreed to speak, albeit reluctantly. On the morning of the event, folding chairs were set up in the snowy lot outside the garage. Pastor Joe arranged a portable heater, while Mrs. Pineda laid out trays of hot cocoa and pastries. Despite the biting cold, a modest crowd gathered, some in wheelchairs, others holding handmade signs that read, "Mobility is a right and people over profits." Patrick paced near the entrance, lines of tension etched on his face, as Alice tried to calm his nerves. "I'm not a public speaker," he muttered for the 10th time, adjusting the collar of his heavy jacket. "You'll do fine," Alice assured him, brushing a bit of snow off her wheelchair. "Just speak from the heart. That's what people want to hear." When the cameras rolled, Claire introduced herself and laid out the facts of the case, how Brunswick was claiming broad patents to stifle custom solutions, how sabotage had targeted Patrick's work, and how the community had rallied to rebuild. Then she handed the microphone to Patrick. He took it with a shaky breath. "I'm just a mechanic," he began, voice echoing in the crisp air. "I fix old cars, trucks, farm equipment, whatever breaks around here. I never wanted to take on a giant corporation. But when Alice Monroe came to me with a broken wheelchair, I saw how one-size-fits-all solutions can fail real people. So I built her something tailored to her needs." He held up a photograph of the finished design. For that, they say I'm infringing. They've threatened lawsuits, tried intimidation, and even vandalized my shop. All because I made a chair that fits one person better than anything on the market. Alice watched from the side, tears pricking her eyes as she caught the fervor in Patrick's words. This was the man she believed in, not a corporate strategist, but someone guided by integrity and a desire to help. Patrick continued, I don't want to be anyone's poster boy. I just want to do what's right, give people what they actually need. If Brunswick Mobility or any other big company wants to sue me for that, then fine. But they should know they're not just fighting me. They're fighting every small-town mechanic, every person who's ever felt overlooked by mass-market products, and every community that believes in taking care of its own. Applause broke out, louder than he expected. The camera zoomed in, capturing the earnest determination on Patrick's face. Cody, standing off to the side, beamed like a proud younger brother. Claire nodded approvingly. Alice took the mic next, recounting how Patrick's design had transformed her day-to-day life. She spoke about independence, dignity, and the countless others who might benefit from personalized designs. We're not against innovation, she said. We're against fear tactics and greed that stifle it. We deserve better than mass-produced mediocrity. When the last question had been answered, the crowd dispersed slowly. Some folks lingered to shake Patrick's hand or to speak with Alice and Claire about the design. A sense of camaraderie filled the icy air. Even though the threat of Brunswick loomed, the press conference gave them a new wave of public support. Back inside the warm garage, Patrick finally allowed a small, tired smile. That was easier than I thought, he admitted, shoulders relaxing. Maybe if the right people see this, they'll realize we're not backing down. Alice reached out, touching his arm. You were perfect, she whispered. Their eyes met, charged with a quiet understanding, a bond forged under pressure, tempered like steel. The fight was far from over, but in that moment, they stood together, unbreakable in their resolve. The following days were a whirlwind of phone calls, emails, and media requests. Patrick's humble office, once a quiet corner stacked with grease-stained ledgers, now bustled with Claire's laptops, a printer churning out legal documents, and even a small camera set up for remote interviews. Cody joked that they might need to build a second floor if the attention continued. One brisk afternoon, Alice stepped out to test another modification Patrick had made to the wheelchair's rear stabilizers. She maneuvered expertly around the side lot, finding the motion smooth and almost effortless. A sense of pride swelled in her chest. This was proof that dedication and creativity could achieve wonders. She decided on the spot to film a short video demonstration to post online, hoping it would inspire others who struggled with ill-fitting mobility devices. She set up her phone on a tripod, the snow-dusted backdrop giving a cinematic feel. As she recorded, Cody hopped in to act as cameraman, adjusting angles and capturing close-ups of the design. Alice explained each feature, from the shock absorbers to the custom seat mold. It's not just about wheels and metal, she said into the camera. It's about feeling seen, about knowing someone took the time to understand you. When they finished, Cody was practically buzzing. That was awesome, he declared. We'll go viral for sure. Alice laughed softly, brushing flakes of snow off her coat. That's not exactly my goal, but if more people see what's possible, it can't hurt. Behind them, the office door swung open and Claire popped her head out. Alice, Patrick, there's someone on the phone for you. Claims to be from a major news network. They want to air a segment tomorrow night. Live, Patrick groaned. Live TV. Didn't we just do a press conference? Claire shrugged. This is bigger, one of the national stations. They want a short interview about the grassroots fight against Brunswick. Could put a lot more eyes on your story. Alice turned her wheelchair back toward the garage. Let's do it, she said, determination etched in her voice. The more attention we bring, the less likely Brunswick can bully us quietly. Patrick exchanged a look with Cody, who gave him a thumbs up. Despite his reservations, Patrick realized the momentum was there. It was either seize it or let Brunswick control the narrative. As they returned to the office, Claire handed Patrick the phone. A clear, professional voice on the other end introduced herself as Megan Russo from a well-known cable news show. She asked preliminary questions, confirming details about the vandalism, the cease and desist letter, and the custom wheelchair's significance. Patrick answered carefully, mindful of how easily words could be taken out of context. "All right, Mr. Walsh," Megan said finally, her tone brisk but cordial. "We'll schedule a remote feed tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. You'll be on alongside a representative from Brunswick, so be prepared for some pushback." The call ended, and Patrick set down the phone, exhaling a steadying breath. A representative from Brunswick. They're sending someone live. Claire nodded, grimly satisfied. That means they feel pressured enough to respond publicly. Good. You can refute them in real time if they try to spin their patent claims. Alice rolled closer. "Are you ready for that kind of confrontation?" she asked gently. Noticing the tension in Patrick's jaw, he took a moment, recalling the sabotage, the letter, the intimidation that had nearly ruined everything. "I have to be," he said. "They showed up in my town, threatened my work, hurt my friends. Enough is enough." And so, within the cluttered space of an auto garage turned legal war room, they prepared for a showdown on live television. It felt surreal, almost like a dream. But the stakes were as real as the snow beneath their feet, and none of them intended to back down. On the night of the live interview, the garage took on an unusual ambiance. Bright studio lights borrowed from the local news station were positioned around Patrick's workspace, aimed to illuminate him. Alice, in a large monitor that would display the remote feed. Claire and Cody fussed over camera angles and audio connections, testing everything to avoid a technical hiccup. Outside, a fresh snowfall blanketed Ferrisburg, muffling the world in white. But inside, the tension was palpable. Patrick stood in front of a simple backdrop, a white sheet stretched between two poles, wearing a neatly pressed shirt and an old suit jacket that hadn't seen daylight since Marianne's funeral. He felt out of place, but determined. At exactly 7 p.m., the monitors flickered to life, revealing a well-lit news studio. The host, Megan Russo, a poised woman with short, stylish hair, appeared on screen. "Good evening, viewers." She began with a warm but professional smile. "Tonight, we bring you a developing story out of Ferrisburg, Pennsylvania, where a local mechanic stands accused by the multinational Brunswick Mobility of patent infringement. Joining us live is Patrick Walsh, the mechanic at the center of this dispute. Also here is Mr. Marcus Ellington, Vice President of Product Strategy at Brunswick Mobility." Alice, seated just off camera, felt her pulse quicken. Marcus Ellington. She recognized the name, a seasoned executive known for aggressive tactics. The camera feed split, displaying Patrick in one pane and an immaculately dressed Ellington in another. Seated in some sleek corporate office, "Mr. Walsh," Megan continued, "can you tell us why Brunswick Mobility claims you violated their patents?" Patrick cleared his throat, forcing himself to speak steadily. "They allege my custom-built wheelchair for Ms. Alice Monroe infringes broad design patents. In reality, I created it from scratch, focusing on her unique measurements. None of my work is based on Brunswick's designs." Megan turned to Ellington. "Your response, Miss Ellington." "Why go after a small-town mechanic?" Ellington offered a polished smile, the type that never reached his eyes. "We support innovation, Ms. Russo, but we must protect our intellectual property. We have evidence suggesting Mr. Walsh's chair uses technologies under our patent umbrella adjustable wheelbase, shock absorption techniques. We reached out in good faith, but were met with hostility." Patrick bristled. "Hostility? Your representatives vandalized my shop. They destroyed my tools in the first version of the wheelchair. That's not good faith." Ellington's eyebrows lifted in feigned surprise. "Vandalism is a serious allegation. Mr. Walsh? Brunswick Mobility certainly had no hand in such acts. If anyone committed a crime, they did so without our knowledge." Megan navigated the escalating tension with professional composure. So you deny any corporate involvement in sabotaging Mr. Walsh's garage? Absolutely, Ellington said. As for the patent concerns, we're open to a negotiated resolution if Mr. Walsh would only acknowledge his use of our protected designs. Patrick's hands clenched at his sides. I use no such designs. Ask Ms. Monroe. The wheelchair was built around her needs, not your blueprints. Ellington flashed that smile again. With all due respect, Mr. Walsh, Ms. Monroe may not be an expert in patent law. Our engineers have identified key similarities. At that, Alice couldn't remain silent. She wheeled into frame, her expression resolute. I may not be a patent lawyer, Mr. Ellington, but I know my own body. Patrick built this chair to fit me. It's entirely custom. Your claims are designed to stifle competition and scare off innovation. Ellington's polished veneer cracked momentarily. Ms. Monroe, you seem quite informed for a simple wheelchair user. He paused, as if tasting the moment. Could it be that your finances are backing this project? Some sort of personal vendetta against Brunswick? Alice caught her breath. In that moment, she realized Ellington might expose her true identity. She lifted her chin defiantly. If wanting a functional wheelchair is a vendetta, then guilty as charged. The tension was electric. Megan stepped in. We have limited time. Gentlemen, Miss Monroe, is there any possibility of resolving this peacefully? Ellington responded smoothly. If Mr. Walsh ceases production and provides compensation for unauthorized use of our patents, I'm sure we can avoid lengthy litigation. No, Patrick said, voice hard as steel. We're not giving in. Megan nodded. Wrapping up, it appears this dispute is far from over. Viewers, stay tuned. This is a story that touches on entrepreneurship, disability advocacy, and the limits of corporate power. We'll be following developments closely. The feed cut. In the sudden silence of the garage, Patrick exhaled, realization dawning that they just challenged a corporate behemoth on live television. The question now was how Brunswick would strike back and whether the truth would be enough to shield them. In the wake of the televised confrontation, Ferrisburg found itself in the media spotlight like never before. The footage of Patrick and Alice standing firm against Brunswick circulated online, drawing both praise and skepticism. Some argued that Patrick was a hero, standing up for the little guy, while others questioned the legitimacy of his claim that no Brunswick technology was used. Hashtags like #StandWithPatrick and #WheelchairWars trended in certain corners of social media. Overnight, the garage phone rang off the hook. People wanted interviews, wheelchair consultations, or simply to voice support. It was overwhelming and more than Patrick had ever bargained for. He struggled to keep up with his usual clients fixing rusted mufflers, changing oil, and replacing transmissions. Cody did his best to handle the day-to-day tasks, but the demand for more custom builds also rose. Alice encouraged Patrick to hire additional help, pointing out that if they won against Brunswick, the door to a broader custom wheelchair business could swing wide open. But Patrick held back, still uneasy about diving into a full-scale operation. Then, one morning, a letter arrived that changed everything. The envelope bore the Brunswick Mobility logo, and for a moment, Patrick almost chucked it in the trash. Instead, he opened it with shaking hands. The content was concise, a formal request to meet in person, accompanied by a non-disclosure agreement. If Patrick agreed, Brunswick would be willing to propose an amicable resolution. Patrick scoffed. Amicable resolution. Sounds like hush money, he muttered. Claire, analyzing the letter, nodded in agreement. They might be worried about losing face after that interview, or they might have found a new angle to pressure you. I don't trust them, Cody muttered, crossing his arms. Could be a trap. They'll corner you, make you sign something that kills your design. Alice studied the letter thoughtfully, but refusing might make us look unreasonable. If we show willingness to talk, it could strengthen our position in court. Patrick's gaze flicked to Alice. Would you come with me to that meeting? She hesitated, recalling Ellington's pointed remark on live TV. Could it be that your finances are backing this project if she showed up in a closed-door meeting, Her cover might fully unravel. Yet, she couldn't let Patrick face them alone. Yes, she said. Of course, with Claire's assistance, they drafted a careful response, agreeing to meet in a neutral location under the condition that Patrick could bring his legal counsel and a witness. Brunswick replied promptly, suggesting a luxury hotel conference room in a nearby city, far from Ferrisburg's watchful eyes. The evening before the scheduled meeting, the garage buzzed with quiet tension. Cody prepared a folder of design sketches and receipts that proved how each part of the wheelchair came from independent suppliers, not Brunswick. Claire rehearsed possible negotiation strategies, warning them about corporate doublespeak and bait-and-switch tactics. Patrick paced the floor, restless. I hate suits and ties, he muttered. I'm a mechanic, not some boardroom shark. Alice rested a hand on his arm. They're counting on that. They expect you to be out of your element. Just remember why you're doing this. He let out a slow breath, glancing at the rebuilt wheelchair. I won't let them take away what we created, he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. That night, sleep came in fitful snatches for all involved. Patrick dreamed of twisted metal, of suits looming over him with accusing fingers, and of Alice losing the freedom she'd only just gained. When dawn broke, it brought a murky winter sky and a sense that an uncharted battle was about to begin. They drove 2 hours to the neutral meeting spot, a sleek, modern hotel with reflective glass windows dominating its facade. The contrast between Ferrisburg's humble charm and this corporate environment felt jarring to Patrick. He wore a borrowed blazer Alice had insisted he present himself professionally and clutched a battered briefcase holding all his design notes. Claire accompanied them in her own car, businesslike in a charcoal suit, ready to advocate fiercely if needed. Alice had swapped her usual casual wear for a more polished outfit, though she still used the wheelchair Patrick built. Rolling through the polished marble lobby, she saw glances of curiosity from well-dressed patrons. In another life, she'd strolled places like this in high heels, a power player in her own right. But now she felt the weight of suspicion from the corporate world she'd been avoiding. A hotel staff member escorted them to a conference room on the 12th floor. The space was spacious yet impersonal, a large oval table surrounded by leather chairs, the air tinged with faint cologne and stale coffee. The Brunswick representatives were already waiting Marcus Ellington and 2 others in tailored suits, plus a woman in a crisp blouse who introduced herself as their head of legal, Jeanette Dwyer, Mr. Walsh, Miss Monroe. Ellington greeted with that trademark suave smile that never reached his eyes. And Ms. Fitzgerald, I presume, he added, shaking Claire's hand. Jeanette Dwyer produced a stack of documents. Before we proceed, we require everyone to sign this NDA. The discussion here is strictly confidential. Her tone brooked no argument. Claire studied the papers intently. After some redlining and crossed-out clauses, they reached a version that satisfied her. Only then did they take their seats around the oval table. Patrick's heart pounded. This feels like walking into the lion's den, he thought. Ellington began with faux warmth. We appreciate your willingness to meet. We'd like to avoid a protracted legal dispute bad for business, bad for your finances. Perhaps we can come to an agreement that respects your ingenuity and our intellectual property. Patrick bristled, but forced a civil tone. I'm not sure how you imagine that agreement looking. I won't dismantle the custom wheelchair we built for Alice, and I won't admit to infringing on any patent I've never seen. Jeanette Dwyer smiled thinly. Mr. Walsh, we understand your concerns, but Brunswick invests millions in R&D each year. Any design that falls under our scope must be licensed. We're prepared to offer you a licensing arrangement, so you can continue making custom chairs under our brand. Of course, she slid a glossy brochure across the table, depicting high-tech wheelchairs with the Brunswick logo. Patrick exchanged a look with Alice, who stared back in disbelief. You want me to work for you, he asked. Incredulous? Ellington leaned forward. It's more of a partnership. We'd bring your design into our product lines, pay you a royalty for each unit sold. You could continue at your little garage, Or maybe we'd fund an expansion. In return, you'd cede any claim to exclusive design. Brunswick would handle manufacturing, marketing, and distribution globally. The proposition hung in the air. Patrick could almost see the golden path they dangled: financial security, a chance to reach millions of wheelchair users. But he also sensed the traps: the loss of autonomy, the betrayal of the personalized approach that made his design special. Alice cleared her throat. If Patrick joined you, would you commit to fully customizing each wheelchair for individual users? The way he does now, Jeanette shrugged elegantly. Custom work on that scale isn't cost-effective. We'd standardize the essential features. With the production, more people could access a version of Mr. Walsh's design, albeit not quite as personalized. Patrick's jaw tightened. That goes against everything I stand for. Ellington spread his hands. The world runs on pragmatism. Mr. Walsh, this is the best way to ensure your concept helps the most people. Claire leaned in. What about the sabotage at Patrick's garage? The threats: is Brunswick prepared to take responsibility, or at least denounce those actions? A flicker of annoyance crossed Ellington's face. We've already stated we had no involvement in any vandalism. If you require a public statement condemning such acts, we can consider it, provided we finalize a licensing deal. Jeanette slid a contract forward. The numbers were staggering enough to make Patrick's head spin. Think about the possibilities, she said with a polished smile. This could change your life. And Ms. Monroe's as well. The room seemed to press in on them. The whir of the hotel's air conditioner, the only sound. Patrick looked to Alice, her eyes reflecting the same turmoil. Was it worth compromising the core values of his design for global reach and personal financial security? Or would he stand firm, risking everything for the sake of doing it the right way? For a charged moment, silence reigned as Patrick weighed the contract in his trembling hands. The sum offered was life-altering, the kind of money that could pay off the mortgage on his garage, fix every leaky roof in Ferrisburg, and ensure he'd never worry about bills again. But the words on the page spelled out a total surrender of control. Brunswick would own not just the patent for his design, but the creative direction moving forward. Claire reached over, pointing to a clause. This section states that upon signing, any subsequent inventions or improvements you make on the wheelchair concept would automatically belong to Brunswick. She raised her eyes to Patrick in warning. It means you couldn't build anything on your own. Ever. Marcus Ellington's polished demeanor faltered just a bit. We understand your passion, Mr. Walsh, but in a corporate environment, that's standard practice. We invest heavily in R&D and can't have maverick designs floating around. Alice inhaled sharply, her gaze fixed on the portion of the contract discussing mass production. She pictured the wheelchair that had liberated her, expertly welded to her exact measurements. The notion of watching that design reduced to standardized segments, losing the personal touch that gave it so much power, churned her stomach. Patrick turned the pages, mind racing. In the back of his head, he heard Marianne's voice, reminding him that real craftsmanship was about meeting individual needs, not chasing profit. He heard the echoes of neighbors in Ferrisburg who had rallied around him, refusing to let corporate bullies crush what the garage stood for. He saw the look on Alice's face when she first tried her rebuilt chair, how it had transformed her sense of independence. At last, he set the contract down on the table. I appreciate the offer, he said, voice calm but resolute. But this isn't what I signed up for. I didn't build the wheelchair to make a fortune. I did it to help Alice, to help anyone who needs something designed specifically for them. He slid the contract back toward Ellington. So I'm sorry, but the answer is no. Jeanette's jaw tightened, and Ellington's lips thinned. He cleared his throat. You realize we can still pursue legal action, potentially tie you up in court for years, drain your resources. What's your fallback plan? Patrick's eyes flicked to Alice, and he found a source of quiet strength there. My plan, he said slowly, is to keep building what people actually need, one chair at a time, and to trust that I'm on the right side of this fight. Ellington's face darkened with barely concealed frustration. Very well, he said, gathering the contract. But don't mistake idealism for practicality. Mr. Walsh, when you can't afford to pay your attorneys or keep up with the lawsuits, we'll see if your principles still hold. Claire bristled. Is that a threat? Jeanette intervened with a silky tone. We're simply pointing out economic realities. Good luck. With that, she and Ellington stood, smoothing their suits. If you change your mind, you know how to reach us. They left the room, footsteps echoing across the polished floor. The door clicked shut, leaving Patrick, Alice, and Claire in the hush of the aftermath. A weight lifted from Patrick's chest, but in its place came a heavier burden, the knowledge that a legal storm was now almost certain. Claire exhaled. It's going to be a rough road, but at least you're staying true to yourself. That counts for something, especially in front of a judge. Alice rolled her wheelchair around the table, stopping beside Patrick. You did the right thing, she said softly, placing a hand over his. No matter what happens next, you're not alone. He mustered a faint smile, though doubts tugged at his mind. The giant had been provoked, and the repercussions could be devastating. Yet the unwavering gratitude in Alice's gaze was more valuable than any check Brunswick could have offered. In that moment, he decided he would not yield. He would stand by his convictions, come what may. They returned to Ferrisburg under slate-gray skies, the threat of more snow looming. By the time Patrick parked his truck in front of the garage, his body felt drained physically and emotionally. The meeting had been brief, but the tension lingered like an echo in his bones. Cody emerged from inside, waving them in. How'd it go, he asked, concern wrinkling his brow. Patrick simply shook his head. They wanted to buy us out. We said no. Cody blew out a breath. Figures. So now what? We waiting on a lawsuit. Claire stepped forward, setting her briefcase on a nearby workbench. Precisely. She said, I'd expect formal litigation within the next week or two. Brunswick will likely file an infringement suit in federal court. We'll need to respond quickly. The weight of her words settled on them. But Ferrisburg had never been a town to back down from adversity. Within days, the local community kicked into overdrive. Pastor Joe organized a fundraiser to help with potential legal costs. Volunteers made handcrafted items to sell at the Winter Festival, pledging profits to Patrick's Defense Fund. Local artists painted murals near the garage, proclaiming innovation belongs to everyone in small town. Big heart. Despite the looming threat, life at the garage found moments of normalcy. Patrick still handled routine car repairs, changing oil for Mrs. Panita's sedan, tuning up an old tractor for a local farmer. Cody tackled a squeaky transmission in a battered station wagon. Occasionally, they'd pause to check on new messages from well-wishers across the country, or from donors sending small contributions with heartfelt letters. It all felt surreal. As the tension mounted, so did the closeness between Patrick and Alice. Late one night after Cody had gone home, they sat alone in the office, reviewing design notes. The single space heater hummed in the corner, warding off the winter chill. Patrick looked up from his father's notebook to find Alice watching him, a soft expression on her face. What is it, he asked, setting the papers aside. She hesitated, cheeks coloring slightly. I've been thinking about how much has changed in just a few months. When I first came here, I never expected to. She trailed off, as though searching for the right words. To find a place where I felt whole again. Patrick's chest tightened. He reached across the small desk, covering her hand with his. Her skin was warm, her gaze unwavering. You're the one who reminded me that something as simple as a broken wheelchair could lead to building something new, something that matters. For a moment, the swirl of lawsuits, corporate threats, and media attention faded into the background. There was only the quiet hush of the garage, the subtle glow of the fluorescent light, and the fragile hope that they might build more than just wheelchairs and engine repairs. They might build a future together. Patrick, Alice whispered, breaking the silence. I've grown to care about you, about this place. I'm sorry if that complicates things, but I wanted you to know. He swallowed hard, heart pounding. It doesn't complicate anything, he murmured. It clarifies a lot. Actually, leaning closer, he brushed a gentle kiss on her forehead, a gesture that spoke of respect and tenderness. She closed her eyes, exhaling in relief. Outside, the wind howled against the garage doors. Inside, they sat entwined in the moment, neither sure what the future held, but both committed to facing it, side by side. The fight was far from over, but they'd found something worth defending in each other, a reason to stand firm against whatever Brunswick threw their way. One crisp morning, about a week after the meeting with Brunswick, the summons arrived, a thick packet of legal documents from the United States District Court. Brunswick Mobility, Patrick Walsh. In plain language, it accused him of willful patent infringement and demanded an immediate injunction to halt all wheelchair-related activities. The claim also sought punitive damages for loss of business opportunity and irreparable harm to Brunswick's brand. Patrick's throat constricted as he skimmed the pages in his office. This is it, he thought grimly. The avalanche had begun. Claire reviewed the documents methodically, making notes in her legal pad. Alice sat nearby, her hands clasped tight, and Cody hovered in the doorway, arms crossed in silent anger. Well, Patrick finally asked, voice sounding hollow in the quiet. Can we fight it? Claire set the papers down, pushing her glasses higher on her nose. Yes, she said firmly, but it won't be easy or cheap. They're throwing everything they have at you, requesting the court freeze your activities and even seize the wheelchair as evidence. We'll oppose that. Of course, Cody fumed. Seize the wheelchair. That's insane. Alice moved forward in her chair, outrage flaring in her eyes. Over my dead body, she snarled. This is my mobility. They can't just take it. We'll argue personal necessity. Claire assured them. No judge is going to forcibly remove a needed device from someone with a disability, at least not without a very compelling argument. She sighed, closing her pad. Still, we'll need expert witnesses, evidence of your independent design process, and possibly depositions from you and others in town. Patrick rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of it all. How do we even pay for all this? The fundraisers help, but he trailed off. The finances a looming question mark. Alice cleared her throat. I told you I have resources. She paused, glancing at the wheelchair that had changed her life. I'm prepared to go public about who I really am, if it means we can pool everything to beat them. She let the implication hang her wealth, her connections no more hiding. Patrick's gaze flicked to hers, concern etched in his features. That's a big decision. You've kept your identity private for a reason. Alice nodded solemnly. I was trying to find someone who cared more about helping people than making a buck. I found that in you, in this town. But now, if revealing my full story can help us stand a better chance in court, maybe it's time. Cody looked confused. Wait, what do you mean? Who you really are, briefly. Alice explained her role as a majority shareholder in a separate medical tech firm, her net worth, and how she'd come to Ferrisburg under a pseudonym to see if genuine compassion still existed. Cody's eyes widened, but he also erupted into a grin. So you're, like, loaded? Alice managed a small smile like I guess you could say that, though money can't buy genuine kindness. Patrick interjected gently. We appreciate the offer, but be sure this is what you want. Once that cat's out of the bag, there's no going back. She nodded, steeling herself. I'm sure, let Brunswick see that they're not the only big player. She turned to Claire. Let's do it. I'll hold a press conference and reveal who I am. I'll openly back Patrick and this design. If Brunswick wants a fight, they'll get one from someone with the means to counter their legal onslaught. Claire tapped her pen against her notepad, lips curling into a small, satisfied smile. That changes the power dynamic significantly. Let's plan carefully. In that moment, Patrick felt a tumult of gratitude, worry, and admiration for Alice. By stepping out of the shadows, she was risking her privacy and possibly igniting a media storm. But she was doing it for the same reason he'd built her wheelchair in the first place, because sometimes doing the right thing meant forging ahead. Consequences be damned. They would face Brunswick with everything they had, and maybe, just maybe, they'd win. 2 days later, the press conference was set on the same snowy lot outside Patrick's garage, but this time with a much larger stage and more sophisticated equipment. Word had spread that Alice Monroe in alias was actually Allison Sorensen, a well-known figure in the medical tech world who had disappeared from public view nearly a year prior. The mystery of her sudden reemergence piqued the curiosity of national outlets. Satellite trucks lined the street, causing a minor traffic jam in the usually quiet Ferrisburg. Patrick stood to the side, heart pounding as he watched technicians set up cameras and microphones. Cody helped with crowd control, directing townsfolk and curious onlookers. Claire checked her phone repeatedly, coordinating with media contacts. The stakes felt higher than ever. If Brunswick wanted a battle in the public eye, they were about to get it. Finally, we have my mind. Alice, now Allison, rolled up to the small podium. She wore a tailored coat, her hair neatly styled, looking every bit the confident executive she once was. Yet as she faced the sea of cameras, a flicker of vulnerability passed across her features. She glanced at Patrick, who gave her a reassuring nod. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice steady despite the swirl of cold wind and murmuring spectators. "My name is Allison Sorensen. For those wondering, I did not lie about my disability or my need for a functional wheelchair, but I did use a different name to see how people would treat me if they thought I was an ordinary person with ordinary means." A ripple went through the crowd's surprise. Intrigue. She continued, "What I found here in Ferrisburg was something money can't buy: genuine compassion, exemplified by Patrick Walsh. When he discovered my wheelchair was beyond repair, he didn't turn me away or upsell me. He dedicated himself to building a new, custom design, transforming my mobility and my outlook on life." She paused, letting the emotional weight of her words settle. Now Brunswick Mobility accuses him of patent infringement and demands he stop making a product that has changed my life. They're using legal intimidation tactics, and they vandalized his garage, all because they believe they have the exclusive right to claim innovation in the wheelchair space. Allison locked eyes with the cameras. "Well, guess what? I hold significant shares in another medical technology firm, and I'm prepared to invest those resources to defend Patrick and to protect his right to innovate. We'll fight Brunswick's lawsuit, and we'll do so publicly, so everyone can see how corporate power tries to crush community-driven solutions." The crowd stirred with excitement. A cheer rose from a cluster of Ferrisburg residents. Photographers snapped pictures at rapid-fire speed. Patrick watched with awe. This was a side of Alice Allison he hadn't fully seen: a strong, eloquent leader, unafraid of corporate giants. Stepping back, she gestured toward Patrick, who approached the podium reluctantly. I'm not as good at speeches," he admitted, drawing a ripple of laughter. "But I'll say this: I built the wheelchair to help someone who needed it, and I'll keep building them if that's what it takes. We're not stealing from Brunswick. We're just making what the big companies won't: devices perfectly suited to real, individual people." The applause that followed felt like a wave of warmth in the freezing air. As the cameras cut away for live broadcasts, local supporters rushed forward to congratulate Allison and Patrick. Cody high-fived them both, beaming like a proud son. Mrs. Pineda handed out cups of hot coffee and pastries to the crowd, her own eyes shining with emotion. In the midst of this triumphant scene, an email notification pinged on Claire's phone. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightening. She tapped Patrick's shoulder and showed him the message: Brunswick had filed an emergency motion for a preliminary injunction. They wanted a judge to halt any further wheelchair builds immediately, claiming irreparable harm. Patrick's stomach clenched. They'd drawn a line in the sand, and Brunswick was doubling down. But glancing at Allison, at the community surrounding them with unwavering support, he felt more resolute than ever. They would face Brunswick's latest salvo head-on, united and with the world watching. The hearing on Brunswick's emergency injunction was scheduled just 1 week later in a federal courthouse 2 hours from Ferrisburg. It promised to be a battle of attorneys and expert testimonies, each side vying to sway the judge on whether Patrick should be forced to cease all wheelchair-related manufacturing until the main trial concluded. On the morning of the hearing, Patrick, Allison, and Claire traveled together, joined by Cody and two local supporters who volunteered as character witnesses. Snow flurries drifted outside the courthouse, adding a chill to the already tense atmosphere. Inside, the sterile corridors bustled with lawyers in suits. Claire guided them to a courtroom where a stern-faced judge presided. Brunswick's legal team, led by Jeanette Dwyer, occupied one side of the aisle. Patrick's group sat on the other. The air practically crackled with the clash of wills. When proceedings began, Jeanette Dwyer launched into an impassioned argument about how Patrick's unauthorized design posed a significant threat to Brunswick's market share, that it infringed broad patents, and that allowing him to continue production would cause irreparable harm to the company's intellectual property. She painted Patrick as a well-meaning but naive mechanic whose ignorance did not excuse legal violation. Claire, composed and deliberate, countered that Brunswick's patents were far too general to encompass Patrick's specific, custom-built solutions. She presented evidence his father's old sketches, the meticulously documented creation process, the community's testimony of sabotage, and a technical expert's statement asserting that Patrick's design diverged substantially from any Brunswick product. At one point, Allison took the stand, identifying herself as both a user of the disputed device and an investor in competing medical tech. She described the personal nature of the wheelchair, how no mass-produced model had ever matched its functionality, and how Brunswick's attempt to seize it would literally remove her primary means of mobility. Dwyer cross-examined Allison aggressively, implying that her investment in a rival company proved a hidden agenda. "Isn't it true you stand to profit from discrediting Brunswick?" she asked, voice dripping with insinuation. Allison responded calmly, "No. My only profit here is having a wheelchair that lets me live my life without pain or restriction. Patrick Walsh didn't ask for money or recognition. He built something purely to help me. Brunswick had every chance to create a chair like this, but they chose standardization over personalization. That's not my fault." The tension peaked when Brunswick's own expert took the stand, rattling off technical jargon in an effort to link Patrick's seat adjustment mechanism to a snippet of Brunswick's patent. But under Claire's cross-examination, it became clear the patent described a mass-manufactured clamp design with universal pivot points, whereas Patrick's design used a custom-fitted bracket welded at a fixed angle, tailored to Allison's body dimensions. The final moments of the hearing saw each side summarizing their stance. Dwyer insisted that irreparable harm to Brunswick's brand and potential sales justified an immediate injunction. Claire contended that halting Patrick's work harmed real people, and that no compelling proof of actual patent violation existed. After a tense hour's recess, the judge returned, face unreadable, in measured tones. She announced her decision. Brunswick's motion for a preliminary injunction was denied. The company had not sufficiently shown that Patrick's ongoing custom builds posed an imminent threat or that the design definitively infringed their patents. The matter would proceed to full trial. But for now, Patrick could continue his work. Relief flooded Patrick's veins like a rush of warmth in the cold. Allison squeezed his hand, and Cody let out an excited whoop that the bailiff quickly hushed. Meanwhile, Jeanette Dwyer's jaw tightened, and she stormed out of the courtroom without a word. Though they'd won the first round, everyone knew Brunswick wouldn't give up so easily. Still, as they stepped into the snowy courthouse steps, Patrick felt an unmistakable sense of victory. The path ahead remained fraught with legal complexities, but they'd proven they could stand toe-to-toe with a corporate giant and prevail, at least for now. In the weeks that followed, Ferrisburg buzzed with cautious optimism. Patrick continued his usual repair work, but sprinkled in were new inquiries, emails, and phone calls from people across the state, and even from other parts of the country, asking about custom-built wheelchairs. While he had no immediate plans to scale up, he welcomed each inquiry with empathy, explaining that his approach was deeply personalized, not something done overnight. Allison decided to split her time between Ferrisburg and a nearby city, where she established a small satellite office for her medical tech investments. She used her influence to open dialogues with potential partners who believed in individualized solutions, hoping to bridge the gap between Patrick's one-at-a-time craftsmanship and a broader model that retained personalization at scale. It was a complex puzzle, but at least now she was no longer hiding her identity. The legal case continued looming, but Claire maintained that Brunswick was on the defensive after losing the injunction motion. They'd likely attempt settlement offers or new claims, but each day that passed without sabotage or new legal missiles felt like a small triumph. The local fundraiser had accrued enough money to handle initial legal fees, and Allison's own resources stood ready for any heavier financial battles. One frosty evening, as the garage lights cast warm amber glows on the snow outside, Patrick and Allison found themselves alone once more. He was finishing an oil change on a neighbor's truck, while she sat in her wheelchair, reviewing some design sketches. The hush of the night wrapped around them, broken only by the occasional clank of tools. "Hey," Allison called softly, "take a look at this." Patrick wiped his hands on a rag and moved to her side. On a tablet, she displayed a concept for a small production space, almost like an artisan workshop, rather than a full-fledged factory. It showed multiple workstations, each overseen by a skilled builder, and designated fitting bays for clients. The idea was to replicate Patrick's meticulous process without losing the personal touch. His brows rose in surprise. "That's ambitious," he admitted. She smiled. "Ambitious, but maybe doable." Each station could handle a few custom builds at a time, focusing on direct communication with the person who'll use the chair. Her gaze wandered to the spare parts stacked neatly along the garage wall. "I'm not saying you have to do this. I just want you to know there's a way forward if you ever decide you want to help more people without giving up your values." A lump formed in Patrick's throat, a swirl of pride and uncertainty. He pictured a future where he mentored younger mechanics, passing on the ethos of fixing machines while respecting the person behind them. "I'll think about it," he said. "It's a big step." She nodded, respect evident in her eyes. "Take all the time you need. We're not going anywhere." Outside, the winter wind rapped softly on the garage doors. The bitter cold reminded them that adversity was never far off, whether in the form of lawsuits, sabotage, or the weight of corporate greed. Yet inside, they'd built a haven, one that thrived on craftsmanship, community, and genuine care. Allison reached out, taking Patrick's hand in hers. For a long, quiet moment, they didn't speak. There was no need. The future stretched before them, uncertain but brimming with possibility. They had a legal battle yet to win, a world yet to convince that personalized innovation was worth defending, and hearts still mending from past losses. But together, in a small Pennsylvania garage that had defied all odds, they'd already proven one thing beyond doubt: when compassion meets determination, even the most broken things can be rebuilt into something extraordinary. In the end, it was never about machines or metal. It was always about the lives touched, the dignity restored, and the quiet victories that changed everything. What began as a struggle in oil-stained shadows grew into something that money alone could never buy: a community. A family forged from shared dreams, sweat, and sacrifice. They paid dearly for it, tools passed down through generations, nights filled with doubt, trust tested to breaking points. Yet from the ashes, they rebuilt stronger, wiser, knowing exactly who they were and what they stood for. Because sometimes, what we lose is less important than what we choose to hold on to. Principles over profit, integrity above influence, love more powerful than any betrayal. And in that small garage, where metal met heart, they discovered something timeless: that the true measure of life's worth is not what you accumulate, but what you create for others. Camera gently settles on a single wrench hanging proudly, its worn surface glinting in the fading light. Perhaps we all have a choice to make. When faced with hardship and heartache, do we surrender quietly, or do we stand firm and fight not just for ourselves, but for something greater? What would you choose?